So, how did we get here?
Hello, Ricky boy. All right. Yeah. So, well, this is it, man. This is the first episode of my podcast, and
This
I'm
is
I'm
it.
pretty excited. Yeah, I'm pretty excited that you're the guy who's my first guest. And I'm guessing like just to start off, before I even let you talk, I want to just give a quick intro. Exactly, yeah. Just gonna give a quick introduction about what this podcast is about. Think of it for you as a portrait, and or you could say a sort of mini memoir, if you will, to bring out your personality traits and to inspire new perspective for our listeners. To do that, we're going to go on a journey through your life. We're going to look at times, we're going to look at places, and we're going to look at philosophies, things you've learned along the way, core tenets that you live by, that sort of general thing. Um, Obviously, it's not going to be a rigid conversation. It's not going to be like a strict like set of rules we need to follow. It's still going to be um, it's going to be a nice flowing casual conversation. But that's the general idea. So, are you ready for that, Ricky?
I don't know.
You don't
I'll tell
know.
you what, if things get bad, I'm gonna just start climbing this lovely wall back here.
There's no
Uh,
wall back. There's a door frame behind you.
there's a fake door frame behind me. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
which you're clipping through,
Yeah, seriously, isn't that
right?
glorious?
It's glorious. So, what room in your house are you actually in right now?
Oh, well, since you can't see it, I can actually say anything I want.
Yeah, you
Um,
totally can. You're on the holodeck.
basically, that's what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
This is the new holodeck, or
right.
the first iteration of the holodeck,
Okay, perfect.
or anything. But really,
Oh
no. I
man.
mean, I mean, I'm just in my bedroom.
Okay, cool. That's nice enough. Nice enough. Um, let's
Yeah,
start with
and
who are
this
you?
background filming is impressive because I like there's a chair here, but sometimes it disappears.
Yeah,
That's like
and your
I
arm
don't even know if I
disappears.
consider that
It's
good or
it's
bad.
freaky. It's freaky as hell.
It really is.
Clearly. um, so my first question to you is it's very similar to the question. Also, you know what? I'm gonna actually quickly plug that. Um, you're doing a podcast yourself, and
Mhm.
I found it quite intriguing. First of all, I was very I felt lucky and a bit honored to be one of the first guests on your podcast. I was guest number 4. Have you recorded a fifth one in the meantime,
I
or
have not.
you have not
Um,
yet? Okay, but I'm guessing you have the next guest already figured out.
I've got a few guests in mind that I would like to speak to because I think it would be very, very interesting,
Yeah.
and we'll just see where that goes.
Okay. Nice. Um, Yeah, and like the first 3 guests, I found them quite interesting. Well, let me put it this way: the third guest, I haven't listened to the complete thing yet. I found him; he had a very strong British accent. Is he British?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
and combined with the video, with the sound quality, it was a bit difficult to understand. But I'm gonna get back into that. But yeah, they had really interesting things to say, and it turns out that your idea for your podcast and my idea are quite similar. And when you had me on as a guest, it to me that kind of galvanized me into making this podcast, my own podcast, a reality, which has been an idea that I've been kicking around for I don't know 2 years or something. Like I've been meaning to do a podcast for a long time, and I've been meaning to do exactly this to just bring out people's stories and like seeing you do almost the same thing and do it so well, like the way you listen, the way you have the right questions, and the way you also bring out really intriguing details about your guests. I found that very inspiring, and this is part of the reason why we're sitting here now and not next year or something, you know.
Right.
So anyway,
Well, I'm
but
glad
let's
I inspired you.
thank you, thanks. Um, but let's get into who are you today and why? Like,
Who are
what's
you
what's you in a
today and
nutshell,
why?
and why is that so?
Let's just start off with an easy one.
Okay.
Um, my God, who am I today, man? That's a. I mean, if you were, there's so many ways to answer that question
Mm,
because I'm okay. So here's the first point: is that the way my brain works is that you ask a question and there's the obvious answer, And then there's like, what that answer implies, and then what that answer implies, and then what that answer implies. And my immediate instinct is to give you all the background and start with the lowest level so that I can then go to this one and then finally answer your damn question. So my answers generally can take like 20 minutes to answer.
Okay.
So let me do exactly that right now. I am reminded of a book I read that I can't even remember the book, but the guy was saying he was sitting on an airplane, and he was talking to somebody, and the first question that he asked was not the traditional "what do you do for a living," but rather something along the lines of what is important to you, or what is essential to you, something of that nature. And he was lamenting that this is more people should do this, and nobody ever does this, and they always stick with the boring "what do you do for a living" intro questions. And my reaction to it was exactly the opposite. If some person that I've never met, first thing they ask me is, "So what is essential to your life?" I'm like, that's a very intimate question, dude.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I'm not answering that to this person I've never met. What the hell?
That's also, I mean, I'm deliberately, the way I formulated that question, who are you today and why, is so you have the opportunity to answer it in that way if you would like. Like you could say, you could say, I do what you do for a living. When you asked me that, when you asked me to introduce myself, I defaulted to that. I said, yeah, well, I'm a web designer. And then only slowly like stuff came in, right? But yeah, I mean, it also gives people the opportunity to immediately go into, I'm a dreamer and I have this vision for life, and like they can choose to do either.
Yeah, and it's funny because whenever I ask someone, tell me about yourself, a default is generally either their job or their life situation. Like, I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3 children, or even not even a stay-at-home mom. Maybe she's a mom of 3 children, but that is what she wants to answer first more than her job.
Yeah.
When I think about it, like, yes, I could answer in terms of my job. I was a coder for many years, and man, I'm still involved in software development, and that's fine. But I think my favorite method of answering is you can look at how you do a job, and like a coder can do his job in various ways, and the way he approaches it can also be the way that he approaches various other things, relationships and home and finances and all these things. And you could be an explorer, you could be a rebel, you could be a conformist, you could be a bunch of things, and oftentimes the way you do it in job is the same way you'll do it in your relationship, in your finances, in your health, all this stuff. So when I ask myself that question and phrase it that way, I say that the pattern that across all of those domains is that I am someone who wants to understand things in very deep ways. I want to understand the subtleties that generally get missed, that oftentimes have tremendous impacts. There's the old saying that you didn't have a nail for a horseshoe, therefore the horseshoe fell off the horse, therefore the horse lost, like the rider fell off the horse, therefore the rider couldn't fight in the battle, therefore the battle was lost, therefore the war was lost, all because the horse nail got lost.
Yeah.
And those little subtleties sometimes can have very wide-ranging effects. And to me, that's the most important thing. And just noticing how certain things, certain what you would imagine as small details can have very wide-ranging effects, or maybe even not small details, but rather it's a big deal in this area, but you don't notice that it also has a big impact here.
Yeah. So like the
Um,
butterfly effect, right?
like the butterfly effect, yes. And yeah, the butterfly effect is a small example, but then there's a big example.
Right.
As here's a good one. Um, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, everybody rode horses
Mm-hmm.
and used horses that pull carriages and such. And then the car came around, and as a result, horses kind of disappeared. And when you see like old movies that portray those olden times, they show people riding horses and so on. What they don't show is that these are horses, so there should be horse poop and horse pee everywhere.
Of course.
They never show that in
No.
these movies, and you don't think of it, but that was such a significant issue that it led to impacting fashion. Men, you'll see these things where men wear spats on their shoes, these strips of leather that cover their shoes. That was to protect their shoes from horse poop.
Right.
That was it, and it also led to the habit, the etiquette, where if a man and a woman are walking down the street, the man should walk closer to the edge of the street, so that if there's any spatter of horse poop, it'll hit him and not the woman.
Right.
And you're like, nobody ever thinks that, wow, like they'll talk about, the car came and thus, the horses disappeared. No one ever thought, that also meant that like there's no horse poop around anymore.
But isn't there a modern rule for gentlemanly behavior? Like, say, if you're on a date with somebody or you're just out with your girlfriend, you're supposed to walk on the street facing side of the curb for the same reason, so that when there's a car coming by and swerving off the road, or just driving through a puddle, you get the splash and not the girl.
You're right.
That rule
That
still exists in a way.
It's not nearly as well known or built into the
True.
culture
Yeah,
as
it's
it
not.
used to.
Yeah, it's not a cornerstone of our culture, but like
And it also won't happen nearly as often because the example you're providing is, well, it had to have been raining and there would be puddles.
right.
Whereas with horses, there's poop everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And that also implies
It's
kind of
not
the
a
smell
salient problem. Yeah.
outside. This wave
Right.
of horse smell that hits you.
Yeah.
People talk about the smell of cars and pollution, and that's a valid concern. But if we went back to horses, we would have a very different problem to deal with.
So basically, what you like, it sounds to me like you're and it's interesting, because like we've known each other for 11 years now, right? So, um, it's fair to say we know each other fairly well.
You've always owned that necklace. I remember that from the earliest days. You wearing that.
Absolutely. I think I bought it in Montreal though, so it might not have been in 2009, but it was fairly early on. That's true.
Yeah.
But let me get back to this. So, I mean, I'm learning like this podcast is also going to be like give me the opportunity to learn things about people that I've known for a long time. That I didn't necessarily know, because we don't normally have these conversations. Like we hang out, we watch movies, we go out, we talk about what's happening in our lives at the moment, and they're like, oh, I'm going through this crisis, or I figured this out at work. But what you just told me about yourself wasn't something I was necessarily aware of, and it sounds to me like you're somebody that you said, and I wrote it down. I want to understand the subtleties that generally get missed. So you're looking for how do things fit together? Like not just what can we see in front of us,
Yeah.
but what's behind that? Like if you pull back the curtain and look at how this got to be, you're interested in that. You're trying to understand and to get an idea of how did this come to be? Like what's the origin story here? And it's funny, I had similar thoughts. Like I remember distinctly at one point I was thinking of a teddy bear, like just a plush toy. And then I thought, like for a little kid, this plush toy can be like a friend. But for a grown up, it could also be just a plush toy, just an object, right? And like the sentimental value you attach to it depends on, like it's up to you, really.
Sure.
And it might depend on experience you've had with it or when you had it in your life. But also, if we look a little bit further, that plush toy probably rolled off an assembly line somewhere. Let's face it. But if you go further back to the origin story of that plush toy, there has to be a person at one point before it became this big faceless corporation, which is putting it into like churning them out in factories. that sat there and designed it, and that person put put a piece of their heart into it. Like they wanted to give it a certain expression on its face. They wanted it to say something particular, and I like to think that. I like to think of that. What happened? What's the deal with that person that designed this? Like, are they even still alive? It's a little bit like that. I don't know if you've seen the movie Sideways. Um,
Yes,
right?
in California with Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like
Yeah,
this girl that gives this little speech about like when she thinks about wine, how she thinks about the people that picked the grapes and what happened to them and are they still alive? And I had that same thought. And what you just said reminded me of that. Like this seems to be something you're generally interested in. You're trying to look at that, if I
yeah,
understand correctly.
yeah. No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's valuable, and I find it valuable for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the sort of thing that most people miss.
Mm.
And in our modern world with the internet, it's easy to find information if people know it. Which means that now the real value comes in discovering information that nobody knows.
Right.
And
information has become a currency anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
And like the bit about the smell that must have been around when it was only horses.
Right. Yeah.
So okay,
But then you could have learned that in school too, right? Like you could have had a history teacher that went into this.
So number one, it's let's focus on information that people don't know, just because that'll be then easy to disseminate. You don't really need to focus on spreading information anymore. That's not the big problem anymore. But also, once you get into the habit of looking for those subtleties, it makes so many other problems visible in a completely different light, because you realize, oh, I have this problem. I was originally thinking I should solve it like this, but now because I've studied like the horse problem, this is not the right solution.
Right.
No, it's got to be this.
So you get a new perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because you get into the habit of looking for weird subtleties and how things interact. So I think it's also then a perspective on or a benefit to just making life better, your own life, other people's lives, because you can point these things out and notice these important connections.
How does that, like, let's say so this habit of doing that, I'm gonna say it's a habit that like when you describe yourself that way, as somebody who looks at that, who wants to discover this.
Yeah.
How does it manifest in your everyday life? I mean, like, let's say in the morning you get up, you make breakfast, you go to work, you do your daily routines. Is it easy to get lost in those daily routines and lose sight of that sort of, I would say, private mission that you're pursuing, this or this way of life that you want to live, where you look at the deeper meaning and the larger context? Do you catch yourself realizing, wait, I've kind of lost my way there a little, and my life has suffered because I'm no longer looking at the bigger picture, or looking behind the scenes. Does that happen? And how do you integrate this into your life? How do you integrate it into your podcast, for instance? Is that a reason why you're running your own podcast?
Yes. And so to answer that, I mean, there's several questions in there.
It's true, yeah. Let's start with how do you integrate it into your life?
Sure, and the answer is absolutely. I do that constantly, and it's kind of in part it's because I don't, like, on the one hand, I do it all the time, and if I wanted to stop, I'm not sure I could, but but that also kind of has the flip side is, even if I'm focusing on the subtleties of one thing, that means I could miss out on the subtleties of something else, and thus still kind of get lost in the routine of certain things. So that certainly happens. And it's also, significant that, I'm sometimes I'm trying to understand the subtleties of one thing, and in searching for subtleties, I miss the big obvious ones. That it can backfire on you too.
So yeah, because you're
Um,
looking too close and you don't see the. Wait, is
yeah,
that what means forest for the trees? Is that? Wait, hang on. Yeah, kind of right. You don't see the forest because you look at all the
for the
trees.
tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, I'll certainly get kind of like lost in a routine and just,
Mm,
follow a routine. But it also kind of sometimes goes in the other direction where I'm sometimes overanalyzing a routine, looking for subtleties, and not just allowing the routine to exist as a routine, which
yeah.
ultimately is its biggest benefit. You have a routine, you don't need to think about it, you just do it,
Mm,
and okay, that. And as one example, that when I wake up in the morning, I go into the bathroom, I wash my eyes, and I shave, and that's the first thing I do always. Um, and that's an ingrained part of my routine, and I'm glad that it's like that because that makes things much easier for me. And I'd like to kind of like develop that into a routine I didn't need to think about because I've thought about it enough that I'm like, okay, it's like this. Just do this, then this, then this, and this,
mm.
and have that just kind of burned into my brain.
Yeah, I mean, you
Um,
compartmentalize and you. I mean,
yeah,
that's how the human brain works. We can't always be like the human brain filters
yeah,
experiences and impulses or whatever it experiences. Like it filters that like crazy, right? Like we only get
yeah,
like a small percentage of what's happening around us
yes.
because otherwise we would just be in constant overload.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the human, and I've been reading about like the way that perception works, and then how the brain applies meaning to that, and fills in gaps and so on. And so your own human perception is specifically designed just to have you focusing on one small bit,
Mm,
one small piece, because all the rest of it is just too big for your brain to handle
mm,
all at one time. And that's normal, and thus it is advantageous for you to, instead of always focusing on this point, to sometimes say, well, what happens if I look here, what happens if I look there, what happens if I look there. And I mean, sometimes there's nothing interesting. Okay, that'll happen, but sometimes you will discover interesting things that you had just been ignoring.
mm. So going back to how you integrate it into your everyday life, like you say, of course, you go through routines and you have to they have to be mechanical. You have to go through them
Sure.
because you have to go about your day and function.
Sure.
But then at the same time, I'm kind of getting the vibe here that like whenever there's a problem to solve, you're trying to backtrack or like reverse engineer where did this come from, what happened before it. Is
Yeah,
is that something like would that be a practical application in your everyday life of
absolutely.
this?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, as if um, as a good example, if I have, and this happened to me, I have a workout routine that I had missed. And the reason I missed it was because I had originally placed it in the morning. And early in the morning, when not long after I've gotten up, I don't want to do some big physical activity.
Mm,
I don't like that big transition from the quiet of sleep to suddenly big physical activity. And so I realized that I would get better retention, I guess, if I just moved it a bit later on in the day. And that has its own side effects because if it's later on in the day, I might forget about it.
yeah.
um, so it ends up, being its own other difficulty. But these were two, important pieces of subtlety that I needed to catch. And at least now I can say it. Well, in the morning, I wake up, I want quiet moments, and in the morning, morning meditation, that's perfect because I just woke up. I don't want to do something big. Let me just take it. Let me be relaxed about it. And then let's just chill out and meditate. Okay, cool. That's perfect. And, I did that this morning. And exercise is still, I'm still not exactly sure where is best for me to put it in place. And if I need to just adjust my routine and force myself to get into a particular mode at some particular time of the day. I'm still trying to understand how I work there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. You mentioned meditation and like this has been on in the back of my mind for a while since we started this conversation because what you described about yourself kind of almost means that you have to meditate a little bit every day to sort of stay on track, right? And to sort of keep keep a grasp on this way that you're
Yeah.
going through life.
Yeah.
Because I imagine this to be something that's very easy to let go of, you know. I mean, like I said, like as for myself, I recognize the thought. I recognize, you know, the whole teddy bear story. Like I've thought that way. I've wondered how where did things come about, but I'm not consciously integrating that into my life. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps quickly going back to who are you today and why? um, Perhaps a little bit more towards the, or actually, let's stick with the who, and then as we move into the why, I want to
Mm.
start moving around your life a little bit because I believe, on the one hand, well, not on the one hand, I think like we are shaped by the experiences we have in life, also the circumstances that we grew up in. Um, and I want to explore that, right? Like how did you become the person you are today? Sort of like your life story and how it led you here and the
Sure.
decisions you took. Um, but who you're today, if we go back to the more mundane or default aspect of what do you do in life, you said you're a coder. You said you've been doing that for a while.
Mm.
Um, and at the same time, I know we, like, since I've known you, I know that for work you've been a coder, but also we've explored different kinds of hobbies. We've explored different
Mm.
kinds of things to try out and self-improvement. I remember we started, we never finished, but we started reading the book Emotional Intelligence together, for
Mm.
instance, right? Like we've
Yeah.
always tried to sit down and also expand our horizons and learn about social interactions. We've gone out, we've tried to, and not necessarily just try to, we've also been successful at just talking to strangers and making, you know, making new friendships or at least having interesting encounters, right?
Yeah.
So we've done all that, and now you're starting a podcast. So I'm I want to hear more about and staying with the today about what else is going on in your life, or not just going on, but what else have you made go on? Like what's going on because you because of your, like what are
Sure.
some hobbies, for instance, or things that you pursue, right? Personal
Sure.
projects, or
Yeah.
even work. Like it could be that you're working as something else as well, you know, on the side. Like
Right.
I'm also a photographer plus a web designer,
Sure.
so you know perhaps there's something like this as well. Go.
Um, yeah. So yeah, and I mean, I've been in software development for over 20 years, and I, um, you know, let me do it in instead of going into depth of why, we'll wait for the why for later, and I'll just do a
Exactly.
shotgun
Yeah. The why. Yeah.
of a bunch of different things. So it's been in software development for 20 years. For the last 10 years or so, it's been customer facing, which is different from, you know, the default assumption when people think software developer. You know, they think software developer is somebody who's building a product that is going to be sold, but customer facing is a different beast. Um, the You know, other things that I do, I'm very musically oriented, and I have been since I was a little kid.
Hmm.
And so at this point in my life, I've practiced 4 instruments. I'm learning a fourth one right now,
No
which is
way.
harmonica. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
um
The harmonica. We've been talking about that. Um, I'm sure you probably told me about the other instruments as well, and it just slipped my
so
mind.
in my life, I mean, I would say I invest in voice singing.
Hmm. Yeah.
I've I've been
Exactly.
learning harmonica, and when I was younger, I also learned piano and guitar.
Okay. Yeah.
But my skills in both piano and guitar are quite minimal,
Hmm. Okay.
at least at this point in my life. Um, what else here? So, you know, um, I'm big into, um, uh, well, I'm big into playing music. I'm also big into listening to music, and I've got a big music library, and you and I have discussed that,
Yeah.
you know, at
At
various
length,
times.
indeed. I
Um,
started listening to Rush because of you,
yeah, there you go.
and because they started releasing stuff in surround sound.
I actually, and that's a funny story because I knew a guy who told me he bumped into some woman he didn't he didn't know at a party. They started talking, and she mentioned she had got into Rush from an ex-boyfriend, and then in discussing it further with him, he realized the ex-boyfriend was me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which
Nice.
is kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, so and furthermore, beyond that, I'm not I guess I am not all that sports oriented.
Hmm.
Let's put it that way. I never would. I'm never the sort of person who will go out and play like a soccer game with people.
Right. Yeah.
That's not my style. I and it's a whole bunch of running around that just kind of gets on my nerves. I don't know why running around gets on my nerves.
Yeah.
But it really,
Well, soccer, I never, I don't know, never interested me either.
soccer, basketball, hockey, all of them, just no. The closest thing to a sport that I'll play is pool,
Mm.
and
Right.
and that's in large part because there's no running in pool.
Yeah.
It's all about being very calm, being very centered, and putting
Precise.
all of your attention
Yeah.
on precision.
Yes.
And taking the time.
Yeah.
Which is also the way that I approach games. Like I'm big on board games and so on. And when I come to play video games, I don't like the Twitch video games. I like the ones where that are strategic.
Civilization.
It's like Civilization, stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. See,
Have I given
that
you
gives
enough
us.
points of data, or do you need more?
Yeah. No. Please stop, Ricky. Please stop. I'm done here.
That's it. That's another point about me. I wave my hands a lot.
Yeah.
Just to make emphasis and partly because I'm actually using them to describe various things.
Yeah. Which is fine. You can do that. Yeah, no, that gives us a wider range, and also probably more things to discuss as we go, through your life. I think that like we're all, I wouldn't say like born, perhaps, yeah, perhaps born with a certain set of personality traits and things that we're likely to enjoy, right? Like some people are just rock climbers, or like I have this one friend who's like ever since like his entire life he's been taking things apart and he's been interested in electronics. Like that's just always who he's been for as long as he could think, and now he's like crazy, like building like I think he's involved in AI self-driving cars and stuff like that, because that's just been his path in life. And you and I were both very much into music. Personally, I don't play instruments, although I tried playing the piano for many years. And I know, I never caught on. It never caught on for me. But I've been collecting music as well, right? I have over 1,000 CDs, like 1,050 or something. And it's been 30 years now. So I very much can relate to that, and it's always been like for me from my earliest childhood. I've just been very gripped, or you could say interested in the music that I was surrounded with, that I heard on the radio or that my dad was playing. Like he was listening to Pink Floyd and Mike Oldfield and Joe Cocker, which is, well, pop and rock, I would say. Obviously pop and rock, but like, Joe Cocker and Tina Turner, and like he listened to those. But I remember listening to their songs like as soon as I could think, and like Dark Side of the Moon is just etched into my brain. So, and that's always been, other people grow up with music around them, and they never develop that that deep affinity to it. They're like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, like I like it when it plays in the car, or like when it plays at a party, I dance to it, and that's pretty much it. Like they don't know who the artist is. But you and I are like more the people who like go and find out about the band and the B-sides they released, and the like that special edition that has like the bonus track that you've always been looking for, and like this kind of
yeah.
stuff, right? So we're like more nerdy in that respect. Um, would you say this is something that developed for you over the course of your life, or would you agree with my experience that it was just always there?
Okay, so when I think back to my youngest memories, I was like 4 years old and I was still listening to music. And um, there's an important distinction there because you mentioned some people who say that they're into music but they're not into it the way you and I react to it, and it's happened to me where like I'll walk into a restaurant with some people and the restaurant is playing music and literally within 2 seconds I have identified the song,
Yes.
the artist, the album, the fact that it's their remake from their greatest hits album, not the original release.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my friends have not noticed there's music playing.
Right.
And I'm just
Yeah.
like, oh, that's it.
Oh God, I can
And
relate to
that
this.
happens so many times.
Yeah.
I've actually got people annoyed with me, my friends. And literally, I had one friend of mine who just get mad at me and go, God, do you know every song? She's just so frustrated for whatever reason.
It's just
But
because what you've been doing, right?
yeah,
Throughout
exactly.
your life.
Now, when I think back to being a little kid, I absolutely was listening to music when I was a little kid, and my parents were always playing music. They had big collections of records that they would play, and so um, if it was learned from a very, very young age. And at that point, it becomes hard to tell whether or not it was inborn. But it was always around. There was always, my parents were always playing music. And by the time I was like 12, I started collecting my own music. And, it was very important to me because it allowed me to, I think, identify and express certain feelings that I wasn't able to do verbally. So that became very important. And I've also noticed over the years that I have the ability, and again, I don't know whether this is innate or learned because I've been doing this almost 40 years now, so it's hard to know at this point. When you've learned something for 40 years, does that mean you were born with it, or does that mean
Yeah.
you've just been learning for 40 damn years? I don't know. But my ability to listen to music is considerably more developed than most people. I can pick out certain instruments and certain details that other
Yeah.
people simply
Yeah.
can't do.
Same here. Same here.
You know? And that's had an impact on me because it's made me realize. I remember this. I had done some singing. I recorded the singing. I played it for somebody, and there was one particular moment where, in a 3 second gap, in a 3 second moment, I made like 5 mistakes in the way that I was singing, and I would flinch when I heard that part of it. It's
Right.
like, and meanwhile, the guy next to me didn't hear any of those mistakes. And this is going back 10, 12 years. I remember that moment being very pivotal for me because I realized he doesn't hear this. I do. Maybe a lot of people don't hear this. And maybe the reason I'm having this big reaction is because I'm afraid other people are hearing the same things and they're not. Oh, maybe I don't need to worry about this so much. Maybe it's only a big deal to me and not to everybody.
Yeah. It's
And
also a
that
case
was,
of the artist just criticizing, being their own worst critic, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's more specific. It's that I was my own worst critic because I assumed everyone else was capable of criticizing me to the same degree.
Right.
But a lot of people aren't. They don't have those ears.
Yeah.
And can't hear the mistakes that I've made.
Mm.
So that was very pivotal for me because I realized, okay, I heard it, and I can improve on it and develop from there. but it won't be a big deal to other people. And it doesn't diminish what I have accomplished. You know, if I perform something that other people think is great, but I am hearing a bunch of mistakes, that doesn't mean they're wrong and I'm right and I'm, useless and I've horrendously screwed up.
Yeah.
They just can't hear what I hear, and that's okay. And it's all right for them to appreciate it, and for me to accept that they appreciate it.
Yeah. Um, you have a question in your own podcast where you ask people, do you know a thing about yourself that is just not true about other people, right?
Mm.
And I find that question comes from this experience, right? Where you realize at some point in life, and I've had that experience, certainly about music, but also other occasions where you realize something, or you do something, you notice something in life that is to you completely obvious and completely
Mm.
self-evident. Like, how could anybody not see this? How could anybody not be aware of this? And yet people around you miss it. Like,
Mm.
for me, it's often social cues, or just how do you act towards a person so they react back towards you in a favorable manner, right? And I find that many people react unconsciously in like dicks, and then they wonder why there's so much hostility towards them, right?
Sure.
Um, or I wouldn't like. It doesn't even have to be a horrible person that's just horrible all the time, but there've been cases where I'm like, yeah, well, you behaved like a dick, so of course,
Yeah.
this is how people are going to behave towards you, right? And this can shape your worldview. Like,
Sure.
the way you approach the world, the way you go out into the world, the kind of vibes you're sending out is what you're getting back.
Yeah.
Um, Although now I feel like I'm going off on a tangent because this doesn't necessarily apply to music anymore. I mean, does this make you a dick or the other people not? But um,
I
it's an
mean,
interesting train of thought.
yeah. I mean, the whole, does it make you a dick is just basically the reason it's kind of not the relevant to music is because hearing music or not doesn't violate social norms,
Mm,
whereas some other stuff will.
right,
And
right.
if I say or do something I mean, here I'll give you a great example. You and I enjoy insulting each other. We get a great kick out of it.
Yeah,
And this is something I also do with a couple of other friends. I literally have a friend of mine where we got into such a habit of calling each other bastard and dumb dick, to the point that there have been moments where he's forgotten my name because he's so used to calling me that. That's
yeah.
actually happened.
And that's not
Um,
necessarily, yeah, it's not convention, right?
no, and I mean, it's kind of, well, number one, I do this only with a very few people, and it's not entirely based on how well I know them. Like, I will only do this with people I'm very close to,
Yes.
but I don't do it with everyone I'm close to. You know, so that's part of it. And I mean, I also, when I do it, part of the reason I do it is because it's violating social norms, which means A, it's funny, and B, the fact that I do it with you means that I know you and I are close enough
Right.
that I can safely do it, and you won't think that I'm serious.
Absolutely. And we're both in on it. It also gives us that team kind of feeling. Like, we're
Yeah,
both in
exactly.
on the joke, and other people
Exactly.
don't get it. Right.
Whereas if I did that with your girlfriend, who I've only spoken to a few times, she would immediately think I'm a horrible person,
Right.
reasonably, and not want to talk to me again.
At least there's a
You're
chance of that
friends
happening.
with
I mean,
me, Ricky. Why are you a dick?
yeah. Well, in fact, Mel would just laugh her ass off. But yeah,
Okay, cool.
certain people would, right? Like today, my sister was here with her boyfriend, and we had breakfast, and then her boyfriend brought like drinks back to the like cups back to the kitchen to clean, and he was like, "Well, there's still some coffee in Mel's cup," and I was like, "That's fine, just pour it into her lap, and then bring me the cup." And she was like, "You could also just bring it to the kitchen and shove it in Matt's face. That was the exchange, and
Yeah,
you need to be able to do that with
yeah,
a person. But
absolutely.
yeah, it adds to a relationship, right? It enriches the relationship.
It really does,
Yeah,
because it's demonstrating that the relationship is clearly strong enough that this is not a real threat
of
and does
course,
not need to be interpreted that way.
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, like, and what that's also kind of what fascinated me is you when you look at young animals. Let's move away from humans. Talk about other mammals.
Mm,
Like puppies will very consistently, they're young puppies. They get born. They start fighting each other.
yes,
They attack each other. They nip at each
but it's
other.
all playing.
Uh, but it's all playing. It's very clearly not serious attacking. There's no real threat, and part of this is to build bonds with each other, and part of it is also to understand what is the level of aggression that is considered safe versus what is not safe.
Exactly.
Um, you know, and that's something that you need to practice. I am reminded of many years ago. You and I were out with a group of friends. It was late at night, and you were tired. You laid down on the grass. I walked over to a mutual friend of ours who had her makeup kit with her, which
Oh,
included
God.
glitter. Do you remember this moment now?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
I grabbed a bag of glitter from her, walked over, and poured it on your face. and 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 we're all just like, and our friends are looking at us like, is he crazy? Glitter is horrible to get off. I've heard people call
It did
glitter
it
the
did
first.
piss me off. But still, I
And,
mean,
and yeah,
you
it
still
did.
knew
And
you
I
could do
remember,
that, and
yeah,
I lived with
and I
it.
remember very clearly because I poured it on your face. You got up, and your first instinct, what first response was not to get angry at me. You reached out to me for a hug covered in glitter, and I'm like, I just poured it on his face. I have to accept this.
Yes.
So I did. I got the hug.
Yeah.
And I think if I hadn't done that, you would have gotten mad at
Yeah. Yeah, probably. It's true. Yeah, that's how that shook down. Good times, man. Good times.
me. Good
Fuck, that's
time.
got to be like 6 years ago or something.
Oh,
It's
way
nuts.
more than
Or
much more than that.
7 or something like that. Yeah.
My God.
Um,
Yeah, and I mean that's a good example of understanding social norms and like building relationships in part through the sorts of things that could be attacks,
mm,
but obviously are not attacks in the context of our relationship
right.
and being able to
Yeah.
navigate that.
So understanding social norms or getting into like I think and I'm seeing this with my nephew, right? Like he's 2.5 years old and his social environment is his immediate family at this point. So he grows up with the way hang on. There. So he grows up with just the kinds of behavioral patterns of his mom and dad and like the grandparents and then extended fam or like people that he doesn't see as often, but like that would include me and Mel and my sister and her boyfriend, but they're also part of his life, but like there's going to be a point where he's going to get into kindergarten or any kind of social environment where he's going to meet his first strangers and they're going to be different than him, right? And I think that's going to be a shock. um
Yeah.
because I think we're like we grow up a certain way. We listen to certain things. We listen to certain types of music that because our parents listen to them, or we get certain kinds of sets of values and rules, and then we're set to clash with other people's kinds of values and rules. And our instincts are going to tell us this is all wrong. This must not be. This cannot be,
Yes.
right? And that's of course how like all the racial problems come up because like people from different countries behave in different ways and then we have to destroy them because they're
Mhm.
dangerous, which is bullshit. But that's how this comes about, and I think people are differently equipped to deal with this. Like you might grow up in an environment that teaches you, okay, people are going to be different, and here's how you approach that. Like you approach it with curiosity. You're trying to learn about them, or you might grow up in an environment where it's like, yeah, these people are different. They're not like us. Uh, they're assholes, you know.
Right.
So this might shape. I'm just uh, thinking out loud, but this might shape how you approach your environment. Um, and I'm wondering how this is. I can let me try to get back to the question that's buried somewhere within what I within this
Yeah.
whole thing that I just said. Um, I'm trying to understand, or I think I want to know from you. Do you remember a time in your life where this happened, where you felt that clash, where you felt like these people are entirely different from me, and you felt like in your stomach you felt that, oh my God, I need to protect myself from them, or you felt threatened by them.
Mhm.
Um, and did you grow out of that? How did you approach that? How did you deal with it? Try to go
Yeah.
back to, like, I don't know what happened. Did this happen in your childhood? Did this happen in your formative years, like your adolescence? Like, how did that work for you?
Yeah, and I mean, well, certainly, there are people who didn't think the way I did, and either I perceived them as a threat or they perceived me as a threat. That was, I mean, that was most of school, frankly. Um, and that was always the case. I was certainly the best person in my class in math for I basically ages 6 to 17.
Mm-hmm.
That was very, very consistent. I was always math class number one, and that ends up that automatically means that I'm different from everyone else, and I don't fit in. And I was not sports related. Like I said, I didn't get into sports,
Right.
so that also marked
Which
me
very
different.
quickly makes you uncool.
Very,
Yeah.
instantaneously. Um, and it's because sports are so much a part of socialization for a lot of children, and connection. And if you're not even participating in that, the implication is you don't want to be friends with them. And thus they exclude you in other ways, if you're going to exclude them by not playing sports. So yeah, I mean, that happened, tremendously, and it was, I mean, it was a constant, threat in like an abstract sense, but also in a real sense. I mean, I got physically attacked when I was young all the
Mm.
time.
Mm.
I was, I mean, ages 6 to 17, 2 to 3 times a week,
Oh,
which, if
fuck.
you do the math, is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 times.
Mm. So
Um,
when you say physically attacked, like you got kicked, you got hit, you got
yeah, you
shoved.
know, absolutely.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's became, like I would instinctively fight back generally,
Right.
and that was that was very obviously, that was tremendously formative. You don't get attacked thousands of times without it having an impact on the way you view the world.
Right.
So this wasn't, I was attacked 5 times or 10. It was thousands. And so obviously, that just kind of impacted everything I did, and the way that I carried myself and the way that I spoke, and constantly looking for some way to reduce this and make this better, and be able to breathe.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, that was constant. Um,
So that brings up a couple of questions. I think like the first one is like, how did you not become a school shooter? Um, uh, Also, like, let's shelve that question for a moment. But I want to get back into that. Like, how did you, like, you can go different ways when you do that. But
sure.
let's do something else first. What was your safety net? Like, did you come from a safe haven in your family? Like, did you Was that your safety net? Like when you grew up, were you and you don't have to answer that, obviously. But like when was that your fallback, or was it a certain? Did you have a group of friends, or were you de facto pretty much alone? And did you deal in different ways?
I did spend when I was young. I did spend a lot of time alone, and it was, and I did not have very many friends. And um, once I hit my teens, that grew a little bit. I got a couple more friends, not a whole lot. That only really changed once I left high school, because once I left high school and got into college, well, first off, it's a completely different school. It's a complete change of atmosphere and a change of group. Most of the people I had gone to school with did not go to my college, so it was a chance to start over.
Right.
And at this point, you're all going in. You're all like 18, and the idea that you're going to physically bully and dominate other people is not the social norm
Yeah.
in at that point. There can certainly be games of dominance and status, but they won't be based on physical violence.
Mm.
They'll be based on other things, like who can drink more, let's say,
Yeah.
or who can be funnier. So all of that disappeared at that point. I did not have a lot of places where I could go to with other people, because frankly, my experience was that, well, most people are going to just are going to take some opportunity to attack me. So, it
Wait,
was
that
just
was
best
an
to
assumption
sit
that
around.
you just walked around with in life, or is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
So like
Um,
just from your experience in school, being
I
bullied,
mean,
being attacked, you're
let's
like,
detail
this
this
is
out.
probably what's gonna happen.
Yeah, let's detail this out. A lot of people would be violent toward me, physically or verbally. They would do this because I was different. And even if they didn't do this, I was very obviously different. I, made mental leaps that most people could not make. I had interests that most people my age did not have. I was very clearly different and isolated, so I isolated myself. And it led to some. It led to just most of my life being very alone. When I was younger, because it just made the most sense. It led to like weird moments and frustrations too. I would have the ability to notice certain things and be, right about certain things that even adults couldn't understand, which happens sometimes. And I'm just like, and that always frustrated me, because I'm like, wait a minute, you're the adult, you get authority over me. And yet I know this and understand this situation better than you. Why are you the one who gets the decision
Right.
making power, not
Yeah.
me?
So
That was just so frustrating.
are we talking about like social situations where you're like, I can see how this adult behaved in such a stupid, or like, is it more like like you figured something out logically that they couldn't see, or like what? Can you give an example?
Oh, sure. So I mean, here's a perfect example. I remember being like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, and playing a tabletop role playing game. I believe at
Right.
that time it was first edition D&D. And some adult wanders over who I had not met because I was at someone else's house. And he asks me what we're doing. And I'm saying, we're playing a role playing game. And he thought roll meant ROLL because he picked up the dice and started rolling it. And I'm like, no, ROLE, like an actor's role. And he gave me this look like he didn't get it. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, Jesus, you're 20 years older than me. And if any outsider who did not know either of us were to come over to us, they would assume you understand the world and I don't. And yet I have just clearly demonstrated that is not true. So there's an obvious unfairness there.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a conflict between the two of us, people would believe him and not me. And and that was based on something flawed, and that was just so frustrating.
Mm.
So that's a good example.
I
Um,
see. Yeah. Um, Now let's get back to the question. Like you described a little bit more now about your experience in those times being different and being alone. Um, Let me reiterate the because I want to hear a little bit more about that. The question about the safety net. Like, what was your safe haven? Like, how? Like, what? Mm, yeah, what was your safety net? Like, how did you cope?
um, so coping was when I was very young. It was actually let me take a step back and just notice the pattern again. It was about escaping into other places. When I was very young, that was based on reading. Once I got a little bit older, it was based on music. But in both cases, they were solitary activities that allowed me a space where I could just build what I wanted and create what I wanted completely alone, knowing that nobody could come in and wreck it or say that I was wrong or stupid or weird.
Mm.
This was my space.
So you said
So,
music did that,
yeah, absolutely.
and the other thing you said
Reading when I was
reading,
younger.
right?
It was
Yes, yeah.
reading until, I don't know, age 12, 13. And then after that, you gradually music took over.
Mm.
And yeah, and I mean, that was absolutely my safety net there. It was very crucial. Yeah, and I mean,
Mm.
it's
Mm.
it's a general sense that I mean, it left me not really understanding how to relate to the world,
Mm.
um, uh, because a
You
lot of
escaped the world.
it was an
Yeah.
escape, and a lot of the positives um, in the world I did not see. I didn't get to have, and
Mm. Mm.
stuff like you go to some sort of big group gathering and everyone is so glad to see you. Didn't happen all that much when I was young. It happened when I was older, but I had to get there, and
You had some
at the time
growing
I
to do
wasn't.
first. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things had to change. Yeah.
Mm. Very interesting. Yeah. I can relate very much to that. Music also being a safe haven and a sort of thing, a place you can escape to. I had that a lot as well in during my adolescence, and I can relate to that position of, as I'm sure you can imagine, we've known each other for a while, but of being a loner or being an outcast in a way. Although I did have gradually at least a larger circle of friends to find support in and to find like a kind of strength in. Um, I also remember just behaving in horrible ways, simply because I did not know how the world was supposed to work, like how real social interactions were supposed to work. Like, like I saw a lot of people as enemies because they dissed me and they made fun of me. And I remember we were learning English. For those of you, if anybody's watching and wondering, I'm from Germany, and so we had English class and we learned the word misfit, and
Mm.
I didn't know what that word meant. And one of the douchebags in class that I didn't like, um, or I thought I didn't like, because he dissed me a lot, and most of the time I really didn't like him. But he was like, "Hey, Matt probably knows that word," and I was like, and I just spat back at him. Yeah, because I'm a misfit. Fuck you, pretty much. Yeah, like in German,
Yeah.
obviously. And then he was like, "No, because in the song "Learning to Fly" by Pink Floyd, like off the album "A Momentary Lapse of Reason," he says, "Tongue-tied and twisted, just an earthbound misfit I." And I was like, "Oh shit!" Because at some point we had figured out that both him and I liked that album, and I was like, wait, he was actually being nice. And I was automatically so defensive and so like this guy's dissing me, that I couldn't see that he was making a reference.
Sure.
And that was a learning experience for me, where I was like, wait, like my view of the world for a long time was like, most likely people are gonna attack me, so I needed to learn that no, they don't necessarily want to attack me. It's just that, high school kids are assholes, and kids can
Yeah.
be assholes, and you need to go through that and learn not to be one. I also found it interesting that over time, people who get dissed in high schools, people who are the outsiders in high schools, first of all, I believe, or in school, I believe that's a very, very common experience, much more common than you would think, because you always think you have this egocentric view of the
Mhm.
world where you're like, it's all about me, and
Yeah.
nobody else is going through the same things I'm going through. But it
Mhm.
turns out that even the cool kids in school,
Sure.
they face their insecurities. Like probably people in school saw that you were really good at math, and they were jealous of that, and they couldn't
Mhm.
deal with the fact that that, and so they had to rub it in your face that they were the first ones to get laid or whatnot.
Right.
Um, so that's something you need to learn, and I believe that this being a very common experience makes people a target audience uh, for certain types of media or certain types of stories, right?
Mhm.
Like so many TV shows are about the outsiders in school. That's like the
Mhm.
nerds who always get dissed, and then like they get their revenge against the cool kids. Like
Sure.
Buffy and her whole gang are just like the Scooby Gang, right? Like they're just like the misfits, and but in actuality they're superheroes. And I mean, look
Sure.
at Superman. I mean, classic
Yeah.
nerdy douche guy. Nobody likes him. Nobody cares about him. But it turns out he's Superman,
Yeah.
or Peter
Yeah.
Parker, or all these characters. So this is clearly, and I found a lot of solace in, and actually later in life only, finding out that wait, what I go through or went through in school is very common, and we all can relate to that, or at least a lot of people can relate to that. I mean, your typical sports jock doesn't watch Marvel movies or superhero movies, so they still can't relate to that. But you know, a lot of people do enough to make it a multi-billion dollar, to make Marvel that successful, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, I had a jumping off point here a moment ago, but now I
Yeah.
lost it. I'm guessing. Let me return to this. So we talked about safe places that you went to. Uh, Tell me about moments in school where you realized, wait, I'm actually cool. Like where you realized about yourself, I did something cool and people recognized that was cool.
Mhm.
And like it, like, did you have a moment where people realized that about you, and in turn you realized it about yourself? Or did that come later? And when, if so, when? Was there a turning point, or was it a gradual shift where you realized, wait, there's things that I'm cool at, and if I play to those strengths, I can become an interesting presence in people's
So
lives.
the earliest one that I'm thinking of is um, being when I was in high school. I got involved in the school play and received, lots of praise for my performance, including from people I'd never met. Like
Mm-hmm.
strangers would just write reviews and said, "Okay, this is what I liked," and and they would just write them in and submit them, and several people were praising, "Oh yeah, that guy who played that character," and I'm like, "That's me," and yeah, he was my favorite. I'm like, "Oh, that's cool."
Nice.
And yeah, so there was lots of stuff like that, and well, okay, not lots. That's the earliest one I can think of.
Right.
Um, which
When
at
would you
that
say
point
that
was I
was?
was 17.
Okay.
Um, Earlier than that, I had a few like teachers who might praise me because, like I said, great in math and in a couple of other subjects. So I had a couple of teachers praise me, but ultimately those are teachers. You only see them a little bit. If they're not kids your age who could become friends that you could hang out with after school or anything like that. So it wasn't nearly as meaningful. What ended up happening, and this is what I was alluding to earlier when it came to music, is I would sometimes discount other people's praise of me if I felt that I wasn't achieving, in my own view, what I should have been, because my view of it was not the same as theirs, whether that was singing or my job or whatever. And there was a big gap there between what I observed and what other people observed, and I was focused entirely on what I observed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a gap, and that caused its problems because it meant I discounted everyone else's opinions, sometimes completely, and that got me into trouble.
Yeah, I get that. So having at the same time, you went through school, obviously, as we all do, just picking or finding out which subjects or which areas of expertise you're good at, and which ones you really suck at. Like for instance, me, I was always good at English. I was always good at German or like just languages. I was good at, well, much later I realized that I really loved acting as well, but that was during my studies. But yeah, I always felt very drawn to writing and to be creative, the arts and stuff like that. But then I really sucked at maths and like chemistry and stuff like that. That was horrible. I couldn't stand that, right? But you said you're good at math and you always have been, and it's I'm sure that led to you being a coder, a programmer.
Yeah.
So is this a path you took? Has this always been a natural path through life for you, or were there other considerations and things you discounted first?
Yeah, it was not a natural path, at least in some ways. And it's interesting you mentioned math because I'm going to go off a tangent and then
Because
answer
you're
your question.
cooking meth.
Yeah, basically, yes. I'm Walter White. That's what I'm hiding back here. Is the RT.
Just to go off on a quick tangent here.
Yeah, but the lots of people say there, in fact, is a stereotype that if you're he's good at math and that's why he's a coder. That's why he plays chess. Thing is, those three aren't actually related.
Mm-hmm.
I never, when I'm coding, take a derivative ever.
Mm-hmm.
Or even bother with long division. Like I just don't do that. I don't need to do those sorts of things. And lots of people will say the same thing about chess. But again, there's no actual math in chess. Unless you're talking about basic addition, then maybe. That's as far as
strategy. It's not necessarily math. Yeah.
And that's always puzzled me because he's got a mathematical mind. That's not mathematical. So what is it that and yet there's obviously some sort of relationship, and the relationship is they're all rule systems. They're math, chess, programming. They're all systems that have very strict rules. There is and the rules interact with each other, sometimes in very subtle ways, and you are rewarded by understanding all of the rules and understanding how they interact. And there's no randomness in any of them except programming, and that's only in the weird programming. When programming is ideal, there's no randomness. You don't have random weird crashes
right.
of your
Yeah,
system.
yeah.
You understand, what it's doing. So there's no randomness. In theory, you can understand and predict everything in math, in chess, in coding, and that's the appeal there. That's why when people are talking about mathematical minds, they're actually talking about rule minds or rule systems, and minds that appreciate that, where you can say, well, if A happens and B happens, that will always imply C. And you can predict that. And well, if you can predict it, then okay, off you go.
Yeah.
Where these sorts of minds struggle is with situations that are opaque, where you can't understand what's going on. And in programming, like if you don't have log files, suddenly you've got an opaque system. But the same thing happens in, like, with people who don't explain their reasoning, or they explain their reasoning but it's actually wrong. I did this because of that, and you're like, no, that couldn't be. You did it because of that, because that happened yesterday and you didn't do this. You did something else. So you're not being honest right now. So I mean, people are opaque. Like, let's say political systems are opaque, and they're also just sometimes random, completely random, and cannot be predicted. And I mean, sports. There's randomness in sports, depending on like how the ball moves and how the wind blows and stuff that you can't really predict. So being able to accept and handle those situations, randomness, opacity, is very different from a mathematical mind. It's the opposite. And I that leads to the very obvious conclusion that, well, if you're a mathematical person, you probably aren't all that social, because social situations are the opposite. You're not going to get involved in any sort of political thing. You're not going to try to understand, a whole lot about politics and who to vote for, and a bunch of other things too. Because they're all the opposite. They're not rule systems.
Yeah.
Or if they are rule systems, you don't know what the rules are. No one ever explains them to you because they can't. Half the time those rules are hidden. And the other half of the time, the rules themselves are outright contradictory. Like we were saying earlier about insults for very close friends, but if you're just a little bit less than close friends, the insult actually becomes a severe problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, where are we in our relationship where it's safe or not safe to insult you, where insulting you would be a compliment versus being an actual insult?
Right.
You can't measure that. You can't like apply any sort of test and figure that out. You have to guess.
Yeah.
And fingers crossed.
And have to go with your gut feeling, right? And that might be wrong. It might run you straight into a wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that to me has been a very important distinction between different systems and areas of life. I initially was very drawn towards rule systems, and more recently I have been drawn to other systems because, okay, now I understand at least what I'm dealing with. There's randomness here. I can't predict it. That's normal. And if I just accept that, well, okay, if there's randomness, there still could be some rules I could extract and rely on, while acknowledging that they're never going to cover everything. So yeah. Your question, I don't remember what your question was. I went off on a tangent and said I was going to bring it back.
Well, the original question was like, is that, I think I was asking about your path in life. Like,
Yes.
was it a straight line going right to math, like and coding, or did you take detours? Did you try different things that you then discounted?
So I did, and it's funny you mentioned that because I kind of did. I mean, when I was 6, I got it in my head that I was going to become a doctor. And I stuck with that very consistently all through school, all through high school. I'm going to become a doctor. And I just refined it. I eventually decided I was going to become a surgeon. And I started, figuring out how to make that happen. Okay. And then I got into college and I discovered I hated chemistry and I hated biology. And that's a problem if you're going to become a doctor.
Yeah.
So and in the end, I ended up drifting. I still enjoyed math and I still enjoyed physics. So I drifted and I eventually discovered coding. And, I've been very happy in that ever since. And I think if I'd gotten into medicine, and I don't think I would have been as happy because it doesn't actually work the way that I would have wanted it to work. So, this ultimately has been a good path for me.
Right.
Coding, software development even is also about rules. And I mean, in the last 10 years, I've focused a lot, not on the coding aspect, but on the user aspect. What do users want? And you can't just ask them because they won't be able to tell you. But even there's some very obvious rules you can follow. Not obvious, actually, but there are some clear rules that they're not obvious, but once you discover them, you're like, oh, it very clearly states in this situation you should do this, and in that situation you should do that, and that will work.
So there's social science that goes into that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as an obvious example, if you're coding something for a phone, then you need to think about how the fact that, well, the user doesn't have a keyboard, and thus you want to minimize typing. If you hadn't thought of that, it might not be obvious. But the moment you hear that, you're like, oh, of course, and now you know what to do.
Yeah.
And that has various impacts that become very obvious once that clear rule is learned.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. So you studied, you finished school, you went to college.
Yeah.
And then what exactly was the name of the subject you pursued? Like,
I was studying in college, the biology and chemistry kind of specialization with the goal of getting into medicine, discovered I hated it, switched into a more mathematical sciences specialization, not really sure what I was going to do. And then I kind of got it in my head, maybe I should just become a mathematician.
Right.
And looking back on it now, I'm really glad that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because that was a very difficult career choice. But I thought it tied in with my interests. I should do that. And this is the late 90s. This is the mid 90s. And government regulations actually intervened, where they said, okay, in your college career, like I was planning my very last semester, and I was going to take, I had 2 science electives, and I was going to take Calculus 3 and Linear Algebra 2. And government regulations said, well, in your entire college career, you've taken, you are approaching the maximum number of math courses. You can only take 1 more, not 2. So I'm like, oh, crap. So I decided Cal 3, okay. And then the second one, I can't take linear algebra 2 because, that would have exceeded the regulation. And my options were, what was it? Astrophysics, which sounded boring, and digital electronics. And so I just grabbed digital electronics because I'm like, what the hell? 2 weeks into the class, I suddenly discovered this is awesome. It's a whole other style of math under the guise of physics. And this is so cool. And oh yeah, it's 1997, and people are talking a whole lot about computer programming.
Right.
Maybe I should consider
that. And that's
that
how you got into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I went on to study engineering, computer engineering, and I've been in software development ever since. And it worked out great.
And just out of curiosity, and I think I know the answer, but all of this happened in the Montreal area. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
gotcha. Yeah. But you grew up just outside of Montreal, right? Like West Island or something?
The suburb called Laval.
Gotcha. Yeah, Laval. So along the way, I mean, now we're like you're studying, you're in college. Um, I mean, at some point we all want to have community. We all want to have this kind of place that we feel we belong in. And to me, there have been several of those. Of course, you start out with your own family, mom, dad, brother, sister, in my case, and then expand to a circle of friends. Uh, to me, then there's also like a sort of larger circle of friends that formed out of that I had from friends that I had in school, but also people that I met randomly and friends of my brother's and his schoolmates that I'm still friends with today. And and then through of course throughout or in my case university, I joined a theater group, and that became a close, tightly knit group of people that were a community. Um, and and then it turns out, like, for me, just like as a social timeline in my life, like, it turns out when I went to Montreal, that started to fizzle a little bit, and then I had less of a community, less of a sort of tightly knit close circle of friends, and more like just friends, like
Mm,
satellites. They didn't
mm,
necessarily know each other, but like,
mm.
I knew them, and I would hang out with that person and that person and that person, and only over time. I mean, I spent 10 years in Montreal, and only like about halfway through did that start to change. And like at some point I met Lucas, and like you and I, we met pretty early on. We met in 2009, but we have not many. We don't have a community in common per se,
Mm,
right? Although some of my friends, Lucas, you get along with him,
yeah.
and
Mm,
but it's it's sort of fragmented again then. And
sure.
I'm wondering how, like, what was that trajectory for you? Like, do you, and also perhaps connected to that, what did you learn, or what consequences, what kinds of teachings did you draw for yourself for the way you lead your life from that? Like, let me rephrase this a little. Um, the people you met through life, did that
Mm.
ever lead to a point where you were part of a larger group or community of friends? Um, and what did you learn from that? From either this experience of becoming part of a community, or just from individual encounters? Is there something that you
Um,
drew from it?
well, yeah, I mean, in terms of building a community of friends, I mean, I made it my explicit goal at some point, and that I wanted to understand, how do friendships happen, how do connections happen, and I invested a lot of effort into trying to understand that, and um, once I got into college, my social circle grew because, like I said, suddenly I completely jettisoned all these people who have known me for many, many years. Only like, I don't know, three, four people from my high school
Yeah.
came to my college. And I was suddenly thrust into a completely different group of people. And, it was so much easier at that point to organize your life and your social circle around shared interests instead of the fluke of we all happen to be in the same space.
Yes.
So I could hang out. I quickly learned. I mean, back then I was big into playing cards, and even in high school. Um, and when I brought it to college, I quickly discovered that there were all these people who played the same card games I played,
Mm-hmm.
which was surprising as hell. But I'm like, oh, and they all hang out in that lounge over there. Cool. Now I know where to hang out. And I just made lots and lots of friends that way. And it was a very big shift where I suddenly felt there were a lot of people I could get along with when when that hadn't been the case before. So there was this significant shift, and you end up becoming much more willing to be open to other people because now, like, there's a lot of people open to you, and there's less risk, frankly. If one person doesn't like you, there's a dozen others who do. So okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
that's all there is to it. Yeah. So I mean, that was I mean, as one example, when I was young, I listened to a lot of Robin Williams, and the stand-up comedy, and I
Yeah.
was big into stand-up comedy. Um, and at one point in this new school, I start reciting a Robin Williams routine, one little bit of it that I repeated many times to a friend of mine. And as I start repeating it, this guy behind me starts reciting it with me.
Ha! Yeah.
And ordinarily I would recite the first, I don't know, 3 sentences or so. And after that, we kept going, the two of us, and reciting every line in sync, just continually going. We did this for 5 minutes straight.
Shit.
An entire routine until we stopped because we got into an argument over what the next line was after that 5 minutes. And that guy, because of that moment, we started hanging out. We started playing cards together. He became for many years one of my best friends. And I mean, I haven't spoken to him in years, but he's now off in Toronto. But yeah, I mean, that opened up a lot of doors for me. He introduced me to his friends who all had similar interests, and away we go.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to those moments. I think I told you that story, right? I think, yeah, I told it during our podcast when I visited, when I was a guest on yours, about how this kid came to my class. Like, he was in a different class, but I knew about him because he was a problem kid in school and he was violent and everything. Then he came to my class, and it turned out he was into Day of the Tentacle, which was a LucasArts adventure video
Right.
game, right? And I was like, wait a moment, like he likes that, and then all of a sudden, like, he became my friend because of shared interests, really. Like,
Yeah.
you find out, oh, he likes the same shit I do, and then you become friends. And I think that is something we learn in life, like we feel alone with the things we're interested in, because if you're not interested into the mainstays or the mainstream things that people tend to be interested in, like if you're not into sports, you're going to have a harder time, let's face it, because so many people are into sports and it's such an easy
Sure.
thing to bond over.
Yeah.
And it's easy to become, I would say, disillusioned and perhaps very frustrated about the world. Like, your worldview
Sure.
tends to skew
Sure.
towards everything's hostile, because I'm not into sports. I'm not a cool kid, and like, if you play video games, then of course there's also the stigma, like video game players, like, the guys that shot up Columbine played video games, so you play video games too, so clearly
Right.
it's just a matter of time until you snap, and all of these things. And you don't have that
Yeah.
when you're a sports fan, right? Like, when you're into hockey,
Yeah.
nobody makes that connection. So there's things you have to battle, and to deal with. But then, yeah, then you realize, wait, other people, there's people out there as well who are into the same things I am, and that helps you, I guess, connect a little more and be a bit better. It gives you confidence, man. Like, that's been my experience. Like, you start to approach the world more confidently,
Yeah.
and then that's also a thing that makes you more attractive to other people as well. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden you have more friends.
Yeah.
But do you feel like over time, like, you had all these friends in high school, or not high school, college, right, or
Mm.
university, during your
Mm.
studies, and then that ended, you graduated, and then do you feel like they scattered, and now these bonds have weakened or loosened, and have they been replaced with new ones?
So, I mean, after I left school, I maintained those relationships with at least some of those people for a few years afterward. And I mean, we just kept connecting. I mean, eventually we did just separate out. People moved on, got married, or had kids, or moved to different cities, or whatever. And that happened. Um, it was it was the sort of thing where I want to, like, it kind of felt, I guess, organic. It wasn't all at once. It was a gradual thing,
Hmm.
and thus, I guess, less shocking or
Yeah,
surprising.
yeah.
Um, uh, and other connections and friendships and relationships built up after that, you
Right.
know, and that's totally fine.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
but there's still, more recently I put a lot of emphasis on maintaining the long-term connections I have, which is why I try to make sure that, you and I have time to talk every month
Mm.
or
Mm.
something like that, because partly it's because, of course, I like you and we are friends, but I also try to remind myself a large part of our connection is the fact that it's been growing for like 11 or 12 years, and we have a shared history, language, ritual, and so
Mm.
on
Mm.
that simply cannot be reproduced. Even if I make another friend somewhere else, it would take years to develop the same level
And then it's
of,
gonna be a different nature of a different
yeah,
nature, isn't it?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I am reminded of, and I mean, his name is Naval Ravikant,
Mm-hmm.
and he's an investor and so on. But he's mentioned before in interviews that he believes that all value derives from compound interest. But he means it in far beyond the financial sense. Financial sense is an obvious one, but more generally, if you have a relationship with someone that's existed for 10 years, uh, it will have generally grown to be of much greater value, because you have shared a history and you have meanings. And, you and I can right now just, say one sentence, one word, one name, whatever, and it will have meaning to us that will not have the same meaning to like any other two people on earth.
Yes.
And I cannot replicate that with anyone else. Um, and that's compound interest. That's just, the growth over time as we continue to invest in it.
Mm.
And the same thing happens with, let's say, a career. I've been in this industry for 20 years in software development in various ways. And that allows me to do things and observe things and have an impact that simply would be impossible. It couldn't really be taught, in the sense that it requires a lot of experience to see it happened like this, but not like that. And I wouldn't be able to summarize all these rules in a textbook.
Mm.
You know, so that's led me more recently to just focus on growing and developing a few relationships to a really great degree.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
to the best of my ability. Whereas before, I was focused more on like used to be like and you'll remember this, I would host parties, and 15, 20 people would show up, and I'd be like, this is cool. And it's cool partly just because it means 15, 20 people like me, but also it meant that, in a sense, I'm seeing all these 20 people at the same time, and I can like check them all off the list. I
Yeah.
saw them all, last week at the party. But how much did I talk to any of them? I didn't have a
Exactly.
2-hour conversation with any of them.
Yeah.
It was a different goal. And then before that, like I said, it was my goal was isolation. It really was. So all that means that now I'm in a different place, and I'm trying to achieve different things.
Mm. I mean, what you're talking about is the classic quality quantity, conundrum. Um, do you want to have a lot of friends, or do you want to have good friends or close friends? And I've been through phases in my life, just as you have, where I tried to build like a larger appeal around myself, where I like more people
Yeah.
would be in my life, and more people would kind of like me, and I would hang out with more people at the same time. But I always found that what I got more quality out of was sitting down with people one on one and just having like a 2 3 hour conversation, which also is part of the reason I'm doing this podcast now. Um, in Montreal, I remember there was I was in at work at Babel, company that tests video games, which you obviously know, but not listeners wouldn't necessarily know. So I worked there testing video games, and there was a lady who was from, I believe, oh God, I don't want to say the wrong thing. She was a Spanish native speaker, right?
Mm.
Um, And at work, we always got along a little. Like we talked here and there. We exchanged a few words, and I was like, hey, why don't we just go and have a conversation and just have like a 2 hour conversation, or just have like I invited her, hey, let's go for a drink, right? And it was not, I was not interested in dating her or anything like that. I just thought she might have interesting things to say. And we sat down and we really did have this 3 hour conversation. And it was really, even though like even after that, we didn't become close friends or anything, but that was an experience just having this one-on-one with the person that I wasn't necessarily close to before and didn't end up being very close to afterwards either, but just having this conversation and this insight into their life and sharing thoughts and experiences, and just learning things she said, um, like learning about how a different person views the world and can view the world. I found that very interesting. She said the same thing at the same time. She was like, I never realized we would be able to have this kind of conversation. And I was like, yeah, good thing we did, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting, very good experience, I believe. Why did we get into this tangent? Where did we come from before I
Who
went off
knows?
on this? Let's take a quick break here. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Just gonna stop this video, start recording a new one afterwards, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. But obviously the call is just gonna stay open, and then we'll come back. Okay,
All
so
right.
see you in a moment.
Zoom in a couple of minutes.
Cool. And bah, we're back. Wonderful, wonderful. Where were we? I thought of a question. Much like Doc Brown had this great idea while he was on the toilet, I did the same thing. So
You have to do the flux capacitor.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm gonna do. But yeah, I'm thinking, why don't we take this opportunity? And we've poked around in your past. We've done all the whole psychotherapy, you lie on the couch type of thing. Let's go back into the present, at least a little bit more, and because I wanna get back to the person you are today. I still want to put you in the spotlight of your biography, though. I was wondering what kinds of circumstances or paths that you've taken do you feel have inevitably led you to become who you are today? Like, what are some of or let's start with just one of the core things you've of the core consequences that you've drawn from your biography, from your life, that make you say, well, this is what shapes me today. If it's more than one, then spill them. But it can only it could be just one if you want to start with one. Or
This will take a while.
there's a lot to unpack here, man. A lot of skeletons.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, because we were talking about, for example, pattern matching and rule systems, and that's something that I'm good at, and I tend to look at the world from that perspective. Even when I acknowledge that something won't always follow a rule, that in and of itself just becomes another rule for me. Okay, well, sometimes this thing will just be random. Okay, that's one of my rules. Another example is about one of my skill sets. We've already mentioned music, and that pops up in a lot of ways because music itself is very organized. It follows a lot of rules, and it's and it ends up being a very creative endeavor. But so much of it is, there's randomness. There's not randomness. There's breaking of the rules that happens in music. But it's done in a very careful way such that it's still enjoyable. Versus like a 3-year-old banging on a toy piano is also breaking a bunch of rules, but it doesn't sound good. And that's also kind of something that's very interesting to me, because if you can break what is generally stated as the rules and recognize that sometimes when you break them, it goes bad, and sometimes when you break them, it goes good, that implies there's another rule in there. There's a second layer of rules.
Right. And now we're back to peeling back the layers, and looking
exactly.
at things that aren't immediately salient. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you have music where they break the rules and it sounds great versus a 3-year-old banging keys, which is also breaking the rules, but it sounds terrible. And you have friendships where you insult them and it strengthens the relationship versus weakens it. Those are two different things, and it implies, there's another layer of rule there. And that's the sort of thing that again, I find fascinating. And kind of beyond that is these all tie into what I've been discussing earlier about things that get things that are subtly true that people don't realize. Either maybe they used to realize it and now situations have changed so they've forgotten, or they just they've never been in that situation so they don't realize the subtlety. I was talking about the horses as one example, and which leads to the implication, I hate cars because they stink of gas and whatever. We should all go back to horses. Well, if we all go back to horses,
yeah,
there's going to be a different stink. And I don't know whether it will be worse or better than the stink of cars. It might be better. Maybe it's not quite so bad. Or maybe it's much more horrifically worse. Definitely, there's going to be way more physical mess on the street that you're going to have to worry about that you don't need to worry about now. Now, if a car leaks oil on the street, it's a rare occurrence enough that you're like, God, and you got to walk around it and you're annoyed. But, horses, there's just horse poop everywhere, horse urine everywhere, dead horses. I remember reading an article about a study from New York City that New York City had to cart away like 1,000 dead horses a day.
Oh my God.
Because horses, they're like many thousands of horses in New York City, back in like the 1800s, and they would just die of old age or accidents or whatever, and at the rate of 1,000 a day. It's just like, so now right now you worry about like a car crash, like blocking traffic. Imagine 1,000 dead horses.
Yeah.
With all that that implies, both in terms of frustration, tragedy of a dead animal, grossness, all these things. So that's also something that I want to keep in mind. And another like layer or thing that I focus on is organization, because I've long been a believer that if you have something, if you own a physical object, and you don't know that you own it, then you don't own it. If you own, I don't know, a baseball bat, but it's stuck so far back in your shed that you've forgotten you own it, you don't own it. If somebody were to steal it, you wouldn't even realize that.
Yeah.
If you suddenly decide you want to play baseball, you're going to think that you need to go buy a bat.
Yeah.
And the same premise occurs with information. If you know something and you don't know that you know it, you don't know it. Whether that's about, horses or your own house or anything else. And that's why, for me, organizing information becomes really important, so that I can have easy access to it, and be able to make use of it. A lot of people write journals, and I wrote a journal for a long, long time. And I'm glad I did. But a journal ultimately is just a historical record. This happened on this date. 2 weeks later, this happened on this date. 2 weeks later, this happened on that date. Okay. But beyond that, I also will then need to extract patterns of it and have a completely kind of separate space to say, these are the patterns that I have noticed. This is what is true today. So that I can and just remind myself, hey, this has happened to me several times. Let me encode that over here. People tend to be like this. So people tend not to be like that, or jobs or whatever it might be.
Right.
And building that is something I had not realized I should do. And I only started doing it 5-6 years ago, and that's its own separate skill set, is building up like these descriptions of what I believe and what I want and what I have noticed about the world.
So you just started at a very at a point where you were pretty far into your life already. You started developing this new skill of organizing information and just knowing where what information is stored that you have. Because otherwise, like you say, like you learn about something, you learn something, but then you kind of forget that you learned it, so that equals you not knowing it. I get that. I like that analogy with the baseball bat. I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And it
That's
makes
actually
it makes
happened in a physical sense. That's really happened to me several times.
yeah.
Where as like I'll buy something and then discover later that I already owned it because I'd forgotten that I owned it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
We
how I
all
get
know
three
that. Yeah.
copies of Total Recall.
Of what? Total Recall?
Total Recall on DVD 3 times.
Oh shit, that's nice. Yeah, but CDs that wouldn't happen to me, or DVDs probably not either. No, but yeah, I know the feeling. We've all been there, right? Which also says something about our society, or like the world we live in, like the Western world. But also, I don't know. I had a thought about this, and now it's gone. But but I like that idea. It makes a lot of sense to have that kind of organization, to have like drawers that you put information into, and then you could pull out that drawer and access the information because you laid it down. So do you do that as like Word documents, or like do you have a software where you put that kind of stuff?
Usually it's Word documents. Because and it's just I'm just capturing it as a document, as a description of this is what it is, and Word is good enough just in terms of some basic formatting, headers, etc.
Right.
I need more than just a text doc.
Yeah.
And Word is fine, and I'm not gonna. I suppose I could fuss about that and try to get a different document editor, but no, that'll do.
So you accumulate knowledge, and you
Sure.
organize it so you have it. You have it ready at your fingertips when you need it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And has that both of these things, like we talked about two things now. Like the first thing that you mentioned at the very beginning of the whole podcast, you want to understand the subtleties that generally get missed. And now this habit of organizing information and having it accessible. That gives you something in life, that gives you a benefit in life that other people don't necessarily have, right? It's something I would argue that makes you unique. Just as, for instance, I remember when you talked to Megan, she talked about how she was raising her kids and she was showing the movies so they could deal with loss before it happens in real life. That is something very unique, right? That is something that she does as an individual, and that also distinguishes her, right? Makes her unique. So this, I would say, makes you unique. Do you feel there's a very concrete benefit that you get out of these two things in life? Like, how does that improve your life, and how would you think other people would also benefit from that?
From organizing?
For both of the things, like let's start with organizing, but also about peeling back the layers and peeking behind the curtain. That I'm actually more curious about because I know that it helps you to see a bigger picture, but I'm not really sure how really there's a concrete benefit in every day of your life. But let's start with organizing or information because I think that's a little bit more obvious and easier to answer.
Sure. So when it comes to organizing information, and it goes beyond information in terms of facts, but it's also organizing my thoughts, my beliefs, my goals, and that's always. So the big benefit there is, number one, it's written down, which means I don't need to rely on my memory. And human memory is awful. It is highly unreliable, and people oftentimes think that their memory will be sufficient. It is never, ever sufficient. Even if you think you have a photographic memory, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to call up the memory you need at the right moment.
Yeah.
Like yes, maybe you can recall every single thing that was said in a particular conversation a year ago, but that doesn't mean you're going to realize right now that that's the conversation you need to remember.
Yeah.
That's a separate, memory that you would need to build and rely on. So, writing it all down saves me all of that. I can organize it and say, this is true, this is true, this is true, but not important. And then later on discover, oh, I thought it was not important, but it is important in this specific situation. And I just add that little note. And it's all in one place. And I go back to it frequently. And that means then, like, as an example, I've written down notes on learning harmonica. If for whatever reason I put harmonica away and then come back to it 2 years from now, I just open up my documents and look at it and be right back, almost instantly, right back there. It was forgotten, but remembering it again becomes very, very easy because I've written it down in some, frankly, exquisite detail. This actually makes reference to a very important point. So there's a writer, his name is Paul Graham, and he's not just a writer, he has a blog, but more than anything, he does investments. He runs an accelerator program called Y Combinator. Right. In Silicon Valley. And they have like people who want to like launch startups, and they teach them a bunch of things about what it takes to run a startup, and these are the things you're going to need. And then Y Combinator, at the end of the program, if they like your startup idea, they will invest in you. So, and a bunch of them crash and burn, and a bunch of them do okay and then get bought out. Two of their big successes, though, have been Dropbox and Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And so Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, or one of the founders. And one of the things that he's written about is what's called the maker schedule versus the manager schedule. When you are a maker, somebody who codes, somebody who writes music, builds websites, your schedule requires you to block out huge chunks of time. If you're a coder, you need like 4 hours at a shot to get anywhere. If you try to do it 1 hour at a time and then you get interrupted by a meeting, like, you generally go 8 a.m. to noon, let's say, and then you would have lunch. But then right at 10 o'clock, you have a meeting. It kind of feels like your whole morning got shot because like you'll go into it being, it'll take you like an hour to really get up to speed. And then all of a sudden you're looking at it and being like, I don't have that much time left before my meeting and I got to put this all aside. That's a maker's schedule. You need big blocks of time. A manager's schedule is, you have lots of meetings. They're a half hour, they're an hour, and you can just, have a bunch of them. And the context switching isn't that severe as it would be if you're a maker. And this is very significant. And like, Paul has said himself that like, he'll encourage his coders to be like, no, listen, big blocks of time out of your schedule, say you can build stuff, go right ahead and do that. That's fine. What I have discovered is that all of this is true, but also by maintaining very strict, scrupulous notes, I can do making on a manager's schedule. I can, in 1 hour, get a lot done because it will be very, very quick for me to do the context switch and get back right into, like if I'm coding something, I will leave a note in the code that says, resume coding here. Yeah. And then when I go back, I just do a search for that phrase and I'm like, boom. Yeah. And right next to that phrase, I've also written, okay, this is where I'm at. This is the questions that I'm pondering. Should I do it like this? Should I do it like that?
Like a small journal, almost.
And exactly, 2, 3, 4 sentences. Mm-hmm. And the moment that I read that, instantly my mind is right back in there and I've resumed my context. And that makes it so much easier to be able to do that. So it avoids a whole lot of problems and a lot of loss and waste when you have to switch context.
I see
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
So
so
basically,
that's
it's about I'm thinking like you're talking about annotating your code thoroughly, and it's just good coding practice, right? Like sometimes I'm trying to teach myself PHP. I'm very slow at it, but
yeah,
at some point I might understand enough of it to actually write my own. But I opened some PHP files from by WordPress, right? I downloaded WordPress and I just peeked into the PHP files, and they are very well annotated. Like they have really detailed explanations about what this file does and that file does, and like if you scroll down in the files, then they annotate the lines of code to really make you understand how WordPress is built. And
yeah,
that's just very good coding practice, you know.
yes,
And I like how
uh,
they have if you go to wordpress.org, you scroll to the bottom, it says code is poetry. It's a very nice way of thinking of it because you carefully craft it, you know, just like poetry. At least that's
yes.
my interpretation or my understanding of that phrase.
Mm.
Um,
I'm going
so
to
you
actually
talk,
add to that because what you're describing,
yeah,
well annotated code, that's like good comments and good function names and so on. And you're absolutely right. That is very valuable, and it's intended for long-term use.
yes,
They write the comment block at the top that says this file is intended for this purpose, and so long as that file exists, that comment block will be needed.
yeah,
And all of that is true, and I do stuff like that. But it's also useful in the short term where right now I'm working on this particular block of code and I say, I'm not sure what to do here. Should I do A or should I do B?
mm-hmm,
Um, and once I have resolved that question, which might take me a couple of days, I'll delete that comment block because it's no longer important.
gotcha, yes,
But in terms of resuming my context, I'm finished for the day. I'm still not sure whether I should pick A or B. Let me just quickly write that down. That'll take a minute. And tomorrow morning, I won't forget whether I was choosing A or B. I will remember I wasn't sure, and this is the reasons for A and this is the reasons for B, and I can immediately jump back into that. And they're not intended to be permanent comments. They're questions that I haven't answered yet.
yeah, yeah, very interesting. But what I was going to get at is like you're now talking about annotating code, and as one of the things you mentioned, like that was part of your answer to my question, like how does that improve your life?
Yeah,
But you also went about you talked a little bit about what I would like to summarize as annotating your life. Isn't that what you're doing? Aren't you
kind
just
of. Yes,
taking notes on your life, on certain
yes,
different areas of your life? So when you have an insight, when you have an aha moment, or when you just collect a piece of information and knowledge that you know you're going to need at some point down the line, or you might need, you suspect you're going to need, you write that down, and if I understand correctly, the files, the Word files, Microsoft Word files that you use for this, they are sorted by context, right? Like you have a file
yes.
that's called this, and then you know
I'll give you,
you're
I'll
gonna
give you
find
some
ins.
examples. Let
Yeah.
me give you some examples.
Okay.
So I have one file that is all of my notes on long-term financial strategy.
Right.
And that will include things on how should I invest, how does my income play into this, should I buy property or should I do something else, how should I handle credit cards and other forms of debt, all of that. And then I'll have another one on like exercising and different exercises I've
Oh, like
tried, which ones
demons,
I
you mean?
like. What?
Like demons?
No. Get out of here. Um, so like which exercises I've tried and
Right.
which ones I like, which ones I don't like, and
Yeah.
times of day, whatever. And that also and that's absolutely what that is. You described it really well. It's annotations or in
Yeah.
coding for it would be comments that describe this is the current state of the world or at least this particular section of my world.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I get that. It's a very intelligent way, I believe, of approaching how you handle your life, not just your day to day, but also where you're going in life, right? Because
Yeah.
you have a much clearer picture of what's going on and what you also believe. It's almost like, I mean, I believe that's also the reason why people keep journals, right? Diaries, they write this today, this happened, and this, and then they can go back and just revisit and perhaps understand a little bit more about themselves, where they came from, where they're going, and why that is, you know. Um, I do the same thing with my budget, and I realize that not everybody does that. I have a financial advisor here in Germany that I showed my budget to. It's this huge, crazy Excel file that really only I understand. But it grew over like more than like I would say it's almost 2 decades old now. You know, like and the way it's grown, like from just a bunch of cells where I write down where my money goes every month, or like every other month or something. Like and now it's like I can track every single cent that I spend. Like I keep sales receipts, or I keep it in mind if if I pay something in cash and I don't get a receipt. You know, I remember, and then I get home and I write it into my Excel file, and it's not that much work really.
Mm.
Um, but I know so well where all my money is going and how I can be in complete control of it, that, you know, at the beginning of every month, I sit down for like 30, 45 minutes and I make myself a budget. And I'm like, okay, this month I expect these expenses. These expenses are regular expenses. This is stuff that only happens this month, like a certain kind of insurance I pay once a year. Oh, this month is the month that I'm paying this. So I write that down, and then I give myself like an extra buffer for like whenever some tragedy comes, or something horrible happens, or like, you know, something I need to pay that I don't expect. And then usually I end up and I always calculate the worst case, because then at the end of the month I always have money left over. I'm like, oh, the worst case didn't happen this month either. How good is that? I have these
Right.
$300 or euros that I didn't spend, that I thought I might have to spend, and onto the savings account they go, you know. And so you know, I could very much relate to that being organized. And when you talked about writing things down for your work, it's funny, I do that. I have a wiki. Back when fandom.com was still wikia.com, I
Mhm.
made a wiki where I would write down everything I learned about marketing and building websites, web design, building your own business, branding, personal branding, all these different, like how to get a good host, doing SEO, like all these different practices. And now I have like 5 years worth of information in there. So whenever I read an article and I'm like, well, this article is interesting, I just learned something, I go into that wiki and I take just bullet points, really.
Mhm.
Like it's just reading notes, you know. And now this wiki is just a big pile of information that I can go back and refer to, you know, and it's so useful.
Sure.
And the good thing about it is that if anybody's interested, I can just be like, it's right here. Go and read it. You know,
Yeah.
I write protected it so that nobody else can fuck with it. So it's just me who edits it, but anybody can read through my wiki, you know, and learn stuff about SEO or whatever. Like pretty much anything I know, you know, or have learned in the past 5 years, is just in there, you know, somehow. And it's really useful for me as a resource. Um, so that's why I said a bit earlier that, you know, this part would be more obvious to me how that benefits your life, how that improves your life,
Mhm.
because I understand how that makes you more capable of keeping track and keeping things organized. The thing that I find more intangible at this moment still is to understand the subtleties that generally get missed, like how you try to understand what's the bigger picture here. Um, Tell me in terms of your everyday routine,
Mhm.
what is going better, or what do you think is going really well because you have this practice? Let's say at work, or let's also
Actually,
say
yeah,
in
work is a great place
relationships.
to start, because, like, at work, um, I have the habit, because I have a habit of organizing. What I have developed is that whenever I get a new customer at work, then I have a template to follow. And I know it's going to be, I'm going to start with this. I'm going to, look at these three pieces of information that I know will be there. And then I'm going to contact the customer with these standard questions. And based on the answers that I get, then I'm going to go here and do this. And that makes the process much, much easier. It's faster because I don't need to scratch my head going back and forth or trying to remember things, and I don't need to go back and forth with the customer on various things. It's also less worrisome because I know I won't forget anything. It's all written down. And as a result, a process that previously might have taken like 2 or 3 calls with the customer and several hours of effort will now take one call of 30 to 60 minutes. And once that's done, it'll take me a half hour of plugging things into, again, a templated spreadsheet. And once I'm done, okay, it's complete.
Right.
And I will send this information off to the customer. And that's it. So I can do things much faster than when I started. And this allows us, and this is the sort of thing I share with my coworkers, and they can leverage it too. So it becomes, very convenient. And I mean, kind of more broadly, I can take basic rules and I can share them with my coworkers, and thus that also saves things because oftentimes then they won't even need to contact me. At least not early on. They'll be like, oh, well, Ricky told me X, and X is true here, so I know what the answer is. And I make sure to keep it at like a high level. And I'm like, Liz, okay, here you go. And they, as a result, it's knowledge sharing in a way that is easy to absorb, but also very broad, so that they can use it in a bunch of situations. I think that overall this is significant. And I like what you said about the wiki, and like, you take an article, you read an article and you'll summarize it in your wiki. Okay, that's great. And like, I'll do stuff like that. I'll read a book, I'll read an article, and I'll update one of my sets of notes. And sometimes I'll literally just update it with one word.
Oh yeah.
But that one word is crucial. Like, I'll have a list of these are the things that impact my life in these ways. A, B, C, D, O, and now I've also learned, podcasts.
Yeah.
And that one word is now, well, next time I read it, I'll be like, oh, these are these things, and also podcasts. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
And that one word, it will be significant. It's which is part of my organization. I don't want to spend a lot on fluff. If I can write something in 2 pages rather than 10, perfect. And because they are written by me, for me, I know how to communicate in a way that future me will understand. And that's really important because I'm not writing it assuming someone else is going to read it. I'm not writing it assuming someone else is going to judge me for it. I am writing it assuming future me will have forgotten certain things.
Right. Yes.
So let me state it.
Remind myself of it.
Exactly. In a way that's about reminders, understanding, no fear of judgment, and thus, that's my focus.
Does that extend into the emotional realm? Does that extend into how you handle your own emotional states or how you handle relationships with people?
Yes, because the non-judgmental aspect is crucial in that regard, because ultimately there's no value to me judging myself for my feelings. Whatever my feelings are, if I avoid them, then that's just closing my eyes to data. That's like, you have a coding problem and you're refusing to open the log files. That's just foolish. So to me, it's crucial to not be judgmental. Now, non-judgment can still allow for confusion, which is a separate thing. It says, it's not that I dislike that I feel this way. It's, I feel this way. I am confused why I feel that way because I imagine I would feel this way instead.
Yeah.
But confusion is not the same thing as judgment at all. And I can also acknowledge that non-judgment is different from acknowledging other people could judge me. I believe X. I allow myself to believe X. Other people may think X is bad. And well, that's other people. Let me keep that in mind. Maybe I should not tell other people that I believe X. Maybe I should change that I believe X.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to attack myself right now for believing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
You know, that's that, and you know that's kind of one of my rules for life is there is never ever any benefit to lying to myself. You know, that doesn't mean I should always be honest with myself about what I believe, what I want, what I think. That doesn't mean I need to be honest with anyone else. But it does mean I should always be honest with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Well put. Well put.
Thank you.
And it's true. You like if you lie to yourself, but we do, don't we?
Yeah. And I mean, that's partly, I think that goes back to like understanding subtleties, understanding, looking for patterns and organizing, is that it allows me to discover when I have lied to myself, or to discover maybe not even lied, which implies some sort of like intent, but just not noticed something. And once I notice it, well, I've given myself an environment where it's okay to notice this.
Yes.
I will record it for my own sake, even if not for anyone else's.
Right. Yeah. But then, like I think we drifted back into organizing and keeping tabs, keeping notes on things, keeping annotating life.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to apply this idea of reverse engineering, peeling back the layers, looking behind, how did this come to be? What steps needed to happen? What things needed to happen so that this thing that I'm seeing in front of me is the way it is? Do you apply that to emotional parts of your life? Do you apply that to relationships?
Yes.
I might have misunderstood, but yeah.
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes, I absolutely do. I'll reverse engineer. It'll be, okay. Oh, well, I've known Matt for 11 years. We still stay in touch. What happened with some of my other relationships where that did not happen?
That we don't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes I can like kind of narrow it down to like a particular event that happened. And that's useful because. And in that case, again, I should write down because memory is not as reliable as you think it is. It's I could say, well, it's a fluke that Matt and I are still friends. But then there's a couple of other people who I have lost touch with, who I was just as close with as you.
Yeah. And
we have lost touch, and it would be. And it's significant to me to understand why that happened. And losing touch with them hurt. So I want to understand, why did that happen? Could I have prevented it? Could I not? Is this something I just have to accept? I don't know, or I didn't know. And in some cases, I've gotten a better understanding. Ultimately, if you and I are both committed to keeping our friendship healthy, then it will.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Yeah,
true.
And that hasn't been the case with everybody.
So you're trying to understand like what happened there so that we could happen this. So you're also looking for patterns so that you'll be more easily able to replicate this in the future.
Yes, exactly. And I think replicate it for myself, replicate it for other people too. Like as one example, one of the commonalities I've seen is I've had a couple of close friends who then got involved with partners, and they tied up their social life entirely with their partner.
Yeah, we all have that.
They saw me as the guy they hung out with when they were single.
Yeah.
once they had a partner, well, they just, stopped replying to my texts. And that'll happen. And, I don't think that that's like, I've given a lot of thought to that. And I'm like, I don't want to be that way.
Mm.
Because I've lost that. I mean, that would cost me a lot of value. Like, yes, if some other guy, he's gotten married and he's had kids, and I won't understand the parenting aspect, but there's more to life than parenting.
Mm.
And, even if that's not the case, like, you can still talk to me about parenting and I can understand. And I can still talk to you about things that are happening in my life that you're not going through and you can understand.
Mm.
And we can still like share there. So I don't want to, more than anything, I don't want to lose out on the continued compound interest that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
There's so much that has been accumulated there, and I don't want it to just disappear.
Yeah. Makes sense.
There's just tremendous value there. So yeah.
Indeed. Couple of rapid fire questions. Although they might turn into longer conversations, but I wanna take a couple left turns now.
Okay.
First of all,
are you wearing pants?
Are you wearing pants? Exactly, and why? People in your life, which one do I start with? There's two here. I'm going to start with the encounter. Has there been a surprise encounter in your life that you didn't see coming, that came out of left field, but that left a great impression on you and taught you a lesson?
Oh, yeah, well, a bunch. And a surprise encounter, and it sounds like you mean a surprise encounter with a person, right?
With a person, yes.
Okay, so there's a bunch of ways that I could approach that. I was talking with a guy there that earlier about, we just started reciting Robin Williams together, and that's a great example.
Yeah.
Where I was completely not expecting that, and boom, off it went. And it just had a long-term impact on my life. We're friends for years and years. And I was at his wedding and became friends with his sister and so on. So yeah, I think that's a great example because you weren't expecting it. I wasn't expecting it. I was just reciting Robin Williams, and it could be anything. And these small things can really blossom and turn into something tremendous. And they can also blossom negatively and become like awful things.
Yeah.
That start off as small things. And that's also fascinating to me because it also implies that you could make a decision that is small, that will have a profound impact one way or another.
Yes. Yeah.
Which means that you can really massively improve your life by doing some small things.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore not doing them can be really hurtful. Which also has the kind of side effect that you can see other people doing the same thing or not, and they're not thinking about it, and thus for them it becomes kind of random, but for you it's chosen. It's if some complete stranger latches on to something I happened to say, maybe this stranger and I could become the best of friends for years and years.
Or enemies.
If that does happen, or enemies.
Yeah.
So if this does happen, I should pay extra attention to it.
Yes.
I should not allow it to just drift off into nothing. It's stuff like that. So I think that's what I get out of it. The recognition that there's so much. We're always planting seeds that can blossom into big trees.
Mm-hmm. Do you expose yourself, or do you seek these kinds of experiences? Do you try to create circumstances where random chance encounters might happen, or where not necessarily encounters, but just coincidences might occur that bring your life into a new path or bring some sort of benefit with them?
So this is an interesting question because I think that these opportunities occur to everyone constantly, probably every day. And it's for everyone, I think the big thing is, do you notice? Do you bother paying attention? And when you do notice, do you bother investing some energy in them? And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't care. Okay, fine. You're allowed to not to care. You don't think it's important. Fine, cool. But if you do care, then this is really valuable because there's constant opportunity here. I mean, somebody once described good luck as opportunity meets preparation, which means that for you to have more good luck, you're constantly surrounded by opportunities. But if you develop your ability to be prepared, if you're always prepared, then good luck just seems to jump out more and more. And it's not perfect, obviously, but there are opportunities out there. And I think that's important to me. I mean, if tomorrow I were suddenly like in a new country,
Right.
I could make friends relatively quickly. If I lost all my friends for whatever reason, I could make new friends.
Right.
And I could grow those friends into long-term friends, I think.
Because you're prepared to seize those opportunities and to
Yes.
see them in the first place and then seize them.
Exactly.
To me, just practically seizing those opportunities looks like just starting a conversation when you could choose not to, but you do
Yes.
it, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
can
mean,
see that.
it's starting the conversation and then growing the conversation, starting another conversation with them later.
Yeah.
And I mean, as one example, and this is might sound ridiculous, but I have a weekly to-do item, which is contact somebody
Right.
that I consider a favorite, and you're on that list of favorites.
Thank you.
And it probably sounds weird to have that in your to-do list, but if I
No,
don't, it's easy for me to forget.
Yeah.
And then I'll go months and months without talking to a bunch of people who I value, and thus suddenly we're just not talking anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous.
See, that's
so
again, that's why I'm doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about
Very nice.
maintaining and nurturing those relationships to keep the compound interest growing. And for me, at least, I'm in this situation where I need to remind myself. If I don't remind myself, I probably won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's two more things that I want to ask. Two more of those rapid fire questions. And there's a couple of other things that came to my mind, but I don't know if we have time for this today. That said, I do plan to bring people back on this podcast. So this is probably not going to be the last one we do together. And also, I think that these podcasts, I'm expecting them to fertilize each other. Like things we discussed today, answers you gave me, or subjects that we touched upon, will become interesting in future podcasts where I talk to other people, where I'm like, oh yeah, Ricky said this, right? Because it inspires, it keeps the brain going, it keeps you thinking about things and perspectives, as in things that have been said and perspectives that have been opened, and it's going to bring more to new podcasts. But while we're still in this one today, two questions that I still have. One is still relating to people, but let's shelve that for a moment. I'm going to go to another one. What's the thing that you're really, really ashamed of that you did in your life? And you don't have to answer it, but like one thing where you're like, oh shit, I really messed up there, in a relationship or whatnot.
I mean, I've done that many times, and sometimes it's shame in the sense that I've hurt someone else. Sometimes it's shame that I've hurt myself. And I mean, the specifics, frankly, I mean, if I were to repeat them, I probably would just end up hurting someone again. So let me not get into that. But I think, for me, it has been um, a willingness to, um, I think, to accept that both of these are true, that I've hurt people, that I've hurt myself, that I've hurt people, and or people have told me that I've hurt them, and I did not believe them at the time. And also kind of the flip side, which is that I have hurt myself, or even someone has hurt me, and other people didn't believe it at the time. There's things that I've done that I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I did that to myself. And other people like, it's not a big deal. I'm like, well, maybe it's not a big deal to you. It's a big deal to me.
Yeah.
And that's important. And I think about that a lot, and because that also is a huge part of my own well-being, is what am I ashamed of? Why am I ashamed? Can I learn something from this and maybe prevent stuff like this from happening again? And there's randomness in there, and there's failure, and it's not a perfect rule system, but it is still possible to learn and to grow.
Yeah, I get that.
There's absolutely moments where I'm just like, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
What the hell was I thinking?
And it's perfectly fine. Yeah, and it's perfectly, like, I like your answer, because you gave a good answer about what that means to you, without going into detail. Like I said, obviously that's a question that I totally understand if people don't want to answer. But you gave something of yourself anyway in the answer to that question, because you talked about what it can mean to you as a person, how it can help you to grow, and how it can help you to process it, right? Or
and
how you do process
reference might be a better way of phrasing it. If you ask this to anyone else, you ask them to think of a time when they were ashamed, and then say, well, so what did that mean to you? And you don't have to get into the specifics of the situation if you don't want to.
Yeah, make that clearer. Yeah,
share the meaning without getting into the details.
Yeah, very good point. Then, so the second question about people in your life, now this doesn't have to be a person that's living or dead or even existing or whatnot. It could be a fictional person, anything, or it could be Gandhi, but any person that really was a big influence for you.
Yeah, there's several. Let me start off with Robin Williams, who I mentioned earlier. And actually, let me let me go on a tangent here. I know you said rapid fire questions, but there's going to be a long
that's
tangent.
That's fine.
You talked earlier about how music was a very big influence on me, even when I was young. So was stand-up comedy.
Right.
And when I was, there's a lot of kids who they watch a lot of funny cartoons, and I think I did some of that, but what really sticks out is stand-up comedy. I was 4 years old, and my parents had a copy of Bill Cosby himself, is his routine from 1981, and they had a copy of it, and I watched that on repeat, once or twice a day, every day for a couple of months straight.
Shit, yeah.
To the point that I was 4 years old and I could recite it, every single word, every single pause, every single extra emphasis, change of voice, everything. I knew it perfectly, and could recite the entire thing from memory, an entire hour and a half piece. And then a couple of years later, my parents got Robin Williams Live at the Met, and that I did the same thing. And that was the one where I met this friend of mine, was because of Live at the Met. And Robin Williams especially was a big influence because he's famous for his high levels of energy, which, despite the rumors, were not actually based on drugs. He never went out on stage and performed high. That was all his own natural energy.
Yeah.
Which is a scary thought in and of itself. But it was very significant to me, because I found myself being able to reach the same kind of levels of energy And he was the sort of person where I could see, like, I could mimic him in various ways and channel that energy in a useful and productive way, in a way that made me funny, made me interesting. I told better stories, you know, by just channeling him. And I saw that in various ways when I would watch him on stage. And I realized I'd been channeling him without even thinking about it. You know, and you know, and I mean, of course, he's you know, he was wildly famous and still is wildly famous, extremely successful, and from him I learned you can be very different from everyone else and have that not just be okay, but be an advantage.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what I kind of got out of that. And you know, he was, to me, I think, yeah, he was always like a sort of hero that I wanted to emulate in one way or another. And of course, you know, him managing his own intense feelings was a big part of his life and came into his stand-up a lot. And you know, I had to deal with that myself. And so, yeah, so he was absolutely one of my heroes. You know, and so it was a big shock to me when he died.
I was gonna mention that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
must have sucked really badly.
It was a great big shock, and you know, I mean, I knew he wasn't going to live forever, obviously, but
Yeah.
it was amazing to watch him go, like just in an interview, let's say, where you knew, and an interview is important because you knew it wasn't rehearsed. Right, it's an interview with Letterman or Craig Ferguson or whoever, and he just goes off on these crazy tangents or whatever, and you're just like, he's just making that up out of nowhere. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and if he can do that, maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
And which has also been one of my mantras, which is, if someone on Earth has done this, it is humanly possible. Therefore, maybe I can do it too. You know, where, you know, someone else did it, they're not a different species from me.
Exactly. Yeah, I had that exact same thought, and it's also one of my core beliefs. It's funny that you're saying that because I don't think you and I have discussed this before, but exactly the same thing, exactly the same. Like I look around at things that people have done, and I'm like, I'm a human. These people are human.
Yeah.
Like we start from more or less the same. We had the same starting point, you know.
Yeah.
So if somebody can do it, then it can be done, you know. So it doesn't necessarily mean I can do it, but it makes it quite possible. Like if I applied myself long enough and hard enough, I might be able to.
Exactly.
Obviously, there's exceptions. I mean, you know, with my fucked up back, I'm not going to become an astronaut or something like that, you know.
Right.
But yeah, I get that.
So I mean, you were asking about heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Williams is a big one.
Yes.
And I mean, I know I've known some people in real life where I'm just like, I mean, I don't know if hero is the right word. It might be the right word, actually, where I'm just like, that person, they've got a good attitude. I want to adapt and absorb that attitude. Or they live the sort of life I want to live. Let's see if I can absorb that and try to live that same way. And for me, I think that's been really significant because more than anything, it's just taught me that changing your life may be hard, but it's not impossible.
Yes. Yes.
And you know, the first step there is identifying people who live the life you want and seeing what from them I can absorb.
It's surrounding yourself with them, ideally.
Yeah.
Having them in your vicinity, in your social circle, is so valuable because you learn the mindset, you learn how they live, you learn how they tick, you know, how they act. Yeah, totally. So things that we didn't get to touch upon, and I think it would be another whole big can that we would open. But I just want to throw it out there because I think we can come back and perhaps talk about that as well. You were in Toastmasters for a long time, and I think you might still be. I'm not sure, but yeah, and both of you, both you and Natalie were very involved with that. And I would have been curious to learn more about like how you get into that, how you get into Toastmasters, what it means to you as a community, and how you evolved as a human through that, or as a person through being in at Toastmasters and really rising in the ranks. And I think you were running a Toastmasters club for some time. Um,
Club president,
yeah,
club
president.
VP of
Yeah, exactly.
education, different roles, different clubs.
Yeah, so we could get into that at a future point because I think we're crossing the 3 hour mark at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, here over here in Germany, it's getting dark, and yeah, I need to finish a couple of things up before going to bed tonight. So that would have been one thing, and there are some others. I might get back to you. I probably will. In the future, there's other things. I just like why I'm hesitating going mentioning them now is like they're from the time that we've known each other. Like now we've talked a lot about things that you do in your life and did in your life that I wasn't necessarily aware of. But I would have been curious about the things that we experienced together over the past 12 years, or specifically over the 10 years that I've been in Montreal, um, and how perhaps we might have the same or different perspectives on some of these experiences. Some of the people we've met, some of the people we've interacted with, some of the things we've done and tried. Um, and that would be a whole different subject that I would be quite curious in exploring. And yeah, that's but today to close, I wanna do two more things quickly. One is something that I'm just stealing from you. Is like what would you say is a good conclusion or a good closing remark? And before we get to that closing remark, I wanna hear about some of your dreams and plans for the future. What's next in Ricky land?
Dreams and plans for the future.
Yeah.
So the one that just occurred to me in the last 2 minutes was visiting you in Germany.
Hell yeah.
I've never
Hell
been
yeah.
to Germany. I've been
Yeah,
to
it's
Europe
about
a
time.
couple of times. I've been to Italy and France and Belgium.
Right.
Germany would be great. Seeing
Yes.
you would be great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Germany and England are on my list of places to visit.
Mm,
Um, so definitely. But that's all going to depend on how the pandemic goes and
of
and,
course.
and
Yeah.
how flight restrictions change. Um, other um, I think more than anything, like the last year for me has been a lot of struggle to maintain routine, and that's an important struggle, frankly. And it's been frustrating that it's been quite challenging to maintain a routine. So I it's definitely on my plans to just maintain this routine and be able to say, hopefully, that like I've gone a month with keeping a routine every day, and because it's very reassuring to me. It tells me that I am capable of learning and that I am capable of achieving what I set my mind to. In a way that is different from achieving one specific project. Like running a marathon is a valuable or important milestone and achievement, but exercising every day for a year, going jogging every day for a year, not a marathon, like just, I don't know, a couple of kilometers, whatever you're doing.
Mm,
Doing that every day for a year, never missing, never breaking your routine, never saying I'm too tired, I'm too hungover, I'm too whatever. That's its own achievement,
yes.
which in its own way, I think is more significant. Because, okay, a marathon is rough, but it's also very contained.
Yes.
It'll take several hours, it'll take you all day, but it's one day. and then you're done. And I realize that I'm glossing over some training and stuff that's required, but exercising every single day for a year, despite feeling sick, despite getting hungover, despite not feeling like it, despite everything, weather and everything else, that's an ability to react to the unknown and unexpected, and absorb those unexpected changes, and still continue on with doing what you were doing, being able to handle them all. I think that is very profound, and that's something that I want to be able to do more and more. I've gotten much better in the last 5 years at creating and sticking to a routine that was fundamentally impossible 10 years ago. Like just using exercise as an example, I used to have go exercise on my to-do list, and I would do it once a month. And eventually I realized I should just get rid of this because I'm never doing it.
Right.
And now it's okay, I do it, and yes, I might miss a couple of days, but I'll still on average do it 5 days out of 7, and that's not 7 out of 7, and I'd like to get 7 out of 7, but 5 out of 7 is still quite significant.
Yes.
Quite important.
Yes.
And it'll be even more important when I can say I'm doing it every day, and I have done it every day for 3 months straight.
Nice.
Yeah. That's the sort of thing that I want to be able to say. So yeah, that was my long rant and digression.
Well, that's something we can revisit in the future,
Yeah.
See how that's panning out for you.
Yeah.
And I can see, with everything you've told me about how you're organizing your life and how you're creating routines, creating habits, and doing this in a very systematic manner. That's what I'm getting from you. A lot of what you're doing in life is systematic and analytically in a way, analytical.
Yes.
In a way, and I think that puts you in a good position to develop these habits and make them, integrate them into your life, and then bring about that improvement that you want. So I can see that happen.
Yeah.
Is the short version of what I just said. Yeah. Cool. So conclude this, Ricky. Conclude this podcast. Do you feel like, are you happy with this conversation? Are you happy with how this went?
Absolutely. I think that this was a great example of the sort of conversations I want to have, that I appreciate. It is, I'm going to go off on another rant. So 2 years ago, I had a birthday party. 2.5 years ago at this point, I had a birthday party, and I invited about a dozen people, and I think more than a dozen, but a dozen people showed up, and we were sitting down for brunch, and I talked to people, but I was sitting at one end, and a couple of people were sitting at the far other end, and I didn't really get to talk to them because they were sitting at the other end of the table, and I felt very stupid, I guess, in a sense, or not stupid, that's not quite the right word, but it felt like a waste because I like these people and I barely got a chance to talk to them. And that was, one of the inspirations to make me focus much more on what we've been calling compound interest. Let's have one-on-one conversations that go into depth and that go a long time. Not parties where I see 20 people at a time and only spend 5 minutes talking to each of them. That is, that's not what I want anymore. So, that's what I want to continue to focus on as time goes on. And it's, and I hope it's what other people take away from this. This sort of conversation is great to listen to as an observer, as a third party. It's great to be part of, and I think it's what we should all strive to do more of. You will get more out of it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, very good closing remark. And I agree. I really like how this conversation went. I thought somewhere around the middle we circled around a little bit, and we jumped back on subjects that we had before, and some things got repeated.
Mhm.
I think that's where I'm going to learn to ask well, different questions, not necessarily better questions, but to lead to lead the conversation in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
But I think that that would be my only nitpick as far as I'm concerned, or my performance in this podcast is concerned. I'm very happy with how this went. I'm very happy that I picked you as my first guest, and it was the logical thing to do, seeing that I was just on your podcast, which, by the way, I'm going to link to in the description, because somebody might actually be watching this video. Who knows? If you do,
Maybe.
subscribe now. I want your subscription
Subscribe to the link below.
down there,
Uh,
not down. Subscribe.
Right.
Don't. Please subscribe. I want your subscription. Okay, never mind. But yeah, that would be cool. And
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm really happy with how this went. And like, if future podcasts go like this, I really think I'm getting out of this what I want, and I'm hoping that somebody who watches it might get some sort of perspective out of this as well, and some ideas, or just inspiration for thought. Um, for me, my goal has been, or is, that if I can, if this podcast allows me to expand my horizons a little and just get my brain working in different ways, or working on different subjects that just come from these kinds of conversations, then that's great. And if another thing I want to get out of this podcast is just to travel more, because obviously you're in Montreal, I'm in Germany. We have to use Skype, but if somebody's just in a different part of Germany, I'm not going to use Skype. I'm just going to hop in my car and we're going to do the podcast in the living
right.
room, and that's something I really want to do. So if I get that out of it, then I'm happy, and I feel this is going in the right direction. So thank you very much, Ricky. Um, and obviously, you're going to know when this goes live. I'm going to do no editing. I'm just going to put an intro and an outro on this. And this conversation is going to be online beginning of next week. So you're going to hear about it.
All right.
All right.
Fabulous.
Let's just grin at the camera and then hang up. Goodbye.
That's creepy.
Thanks for watching. Yeah, that was creepy. Okay, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here, Ricky. And we shall talk again soon. So long. Bye.
Everyone.